Do you like wrestling trivia? Then check out the 5-star match game, the Pro Wrestling Quiz Show. I'm Joe Gagney, and every episode, I grill 3 contestants with 5 rounds of power-packed wrestling trivia. We have over 30 evergreen episodes in the archives covering WWE, AEW, Japan, Mexico, and much, 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 much more. Play along at home and check it out today.
This podcast is a member of the Voices of Wrestling Podcasting Network. Visit voicesofwrestling.com to hear the rest of our great podcasts, as well as show reviews, columns, opinions, and updates across the world of wrestling.
What do you guys want to talk about?
You are listening to the Flagship Podcast with your hosts, Joe Lanza.
If this story was any good, maybe you people would understand it. You don't even understand the story. It goes over everybody's head. How great can it be? Maybe they need to talk more during these matches.
And Rich Craich.
This is my entire life's goal, is to be a WWE superstar, and now I am the NXT Women's Champion.
You can take that. If you want that, great. Good for you. I want him to have to talk about getting roadhead. You know what I mean? Like, that's what I want out of my wrestling. Call me old-fashioned, Joe.
You are listening to the best wrestling podcast in the world, the Flagship Podcast. And I'm your host, the most compelling voice in wrestling media, Joe Lanza, Rich Craich, on another VaKraetschion. Not only is this man on another VaKraetschion this week, this man is now doubling up on his bizarre locales in which he takes these VaKraetschions. Can you believe that these people, Rich and this nurse of his, can you believe, and I'm not making this up, I promise you that I am not making this up, these people returned to Iceland. One trip to Iceland was not enough for these very affluent, millennial people. Let's face it. 2 late model German cars in the driveway. I'm not going to start throwing numbers around, but we all know how well Rich and I are doing. This guy, all the money in the world, Craich and this nurse of his. And by the way, she's not even a nurse anymore. She's some big hotshot at the hospital. So believe me. There's no more ramen noodles in that house, And where do they choose to go? To Iceland a second time. 2 trips to Iceland. When I asked this man why they're returning to Iceland, his response to me was, and I quote, "We have to see the other half of the island." End quote. You think you'd see Reykjavik? You'd go, maybe see a Bjork concert, club some seals, and that, wipe your hands, and that's the end of Iceland. No! These people had to go back for more. More Iceland. There's the old SNL bit with more cowbell. These people have Christopher Walken in their ear saying more Iceland. It really is unbelievable. Listen, when you're double dipping to Iceland, you might just be out of places to visit. That might be the case here. Maybe we need to pump the brakes on the travel. When you're double dipping to Iceland. What, were there no good flights to Siberia this time of year? I mean, what are we doing? Was Antarctica off the table? We'll settle for a second trip to Iceland. Is Death Valley not nice this time of year? Oh wait, they've been to Death Valley. Whatever happened to going to Fort Lauderdale? Nice trip to Acapulco. I don't know. Mount Airy Lodge up in the Poconos. I don't understand these people. These exotic vacations. I mean, whatever happened to just going to taking your wife to Gay Paris, right? Probably get some nice rates right after the Olympics. A lot of empty hotel rooms over there right now. No, these people, they double dip in Iceland. It really is crazy. Really is crazy. All right, we got a lot to get to on the wrestling side. All Out Fallout. All Out was a phenomenal show. If you haven't heard it yet, there was an instant reaction not live, which means it was on the $5 tier this time around as opposed to the $10 tier. So if you're somebody who dips in for our pay-per-view reviews on the paywall side, you're going to save half your money this month. You know, you can pop in on the $5 tier as opposed to the $10 tier. And if you're someone who has never heard one of our pay-per-view reviews, this is a good chance to hear one on the cheap. It's on the $5 tier, instant reaction, All Out. My special guest was the backup Hangman. That's right, Ibu of Wrestle Purist joined me. And the show is getting rave reviews. I think that he's a very insightful and interesting person when it comes to wrestling takes. He's a student of the game. He's a student of history. I think there might be a lot of people who have their impressions of him or what kind of analyst they think he might be a little off based on an unfair reputation, something that I certainly can relate to in many facets. So we kind of crossed streams there and crossed worlds, and maybe I could expose his insight to my audience, and maybe some of his audience will dip in to hear what he had to say about All Out and expose my insights to his audience. So I thought it was a good opportunity to bring a different kind of guest to the table, someone who I've talked graps with for a while now privately, and I thought he would be a great guest to review the All Out show. That's on the $5 tier right now, and as I said, that show's getting a lot of rave reviews. So you should check that out. In my view, what we do in terms of post-show pay-per-view reviews is the best in the business, and just because Rich Craich wasn't around for this cycle doesn't mean that we weren't going to do an excellent job. Just like, when I had to miss the Forbidden Door review because of something personal, we had, speaking of Seal Clubbing, we had, Mr. Warren Hayes step in, and he did a tremendous job stepping in for me. And with Rich on vacation, we had the backup Hangman step in, and you're going to get the same quality review either way. You know what? I'm leaving that in. I'm not cutting that out. You know what that was? That was Miss Maggie Moo absolutely wreaking havoc as I'm trying to do this worldwide pro wrestling podcast live to tape. The cat, I don't even know what she knocked down. I'm not even going to go look at this moment, okay? I heard her scurry away after that crash, so she's probably hiding behind a couch now for the next 3 hours because she knows she done goofed. But it's unbelievable. It's unbelievable. The cat has been napping all day. As soon as I try to get some work done, she's bouncing all over the house, and now she's knocking things over. I don't know what's going on with this cat. This cat is unbelievable. I guess it sets up my transition very nicely, though. I'm sitting here trying to sell some paywall content. I got the cat knocking down lamps. I just broke one of TLB's lamps earlier this week. I'm playing College Football 25 with the boy. All right? And we've got a very intense game going. And I get a scoop and a score. I scoop up a fumble and take it to the house. And in my excitement, grown man, by the way, I throw my arms out to celebrate and talk some trash to the youngster. And my hand smacks into the lampshade, knocking the lamp off of the end table. And of course, the lamp is made of glass. Time stands still as this thing is tumbling off the end table, smashes into a billion pieces. The boy's laughing at me. I'm like, I don't know what you're laughing at. I'm going to blame you. I'm going to tell your mother you did it. So I had to prep TLB with a text message and let her know that this lamp of hers got busted into a million pieces. Just hoping that she wouldn't ask me how it happened. That I had to explain that I scooped up a fumble and took it to the house in a game that I was already winning 35-7 against a 7-year-old. but I just couldn't resist the temptation to celebrate in the living room, thus breaking the lamp. Now, I have no idea what Miss Maggie Moo just broke, but as you heard, and I am not cutting that out, she broke something. I'm afraid to look. It's going to be another regretful text message, but this time I'm going to blame the cat. And it's true. The cat really did it. Unlike the lamp, which I broke and not the boy. Okay, anyway. What do we got? So we've got All Out, Fall Out. We'll get into that a little bit. The final SmackDown on Fox has aired. I thought Rich wrote a very good article behind the paywall earlier this week, or was it the end of last week, whatever it was. And we'll talk about that a little bit. We've got some New Japan to go over. The current tour. There's been a lot of interesting happenings on this current New Japan tour. So we're going to talk about some of the shows. We're going to bounce around. We're not going to do full reviews, but the Destruction tour and some of these Road to Destruction shows have had some very newsworthy matches. There's a lot of news coming out of New Japan. So we will talk about those shows, and then Destruction coming up, and some other news out of New Japan. We've got some more MLW to discuss. I'm going to try to shoehorn that in here somewhere along the way on this show as MLW surprised us. I mean, we thought we were just getting Summer of the Beast and then no follow-up show. They usually do the 2 shows a month, but they did sort of a surprise Summer of the Beast Part 2 that they put out this week. So, of course, this is an MLW podcast now, and we will take a look at that. We've got 2 special guests lined up. We're going to bring in the Cubs fan to talk about the CMLL 91st Anniversary show coming up this weekend. Those of you who listen to this show early, you'll get to hear that segment before the show actually happens. So it'll kind of be a true preview. But because of the timing with the show being on Friday night, some of you, unfortunately, who listen later in the weekend or even the following week, you're going to get a preview of a show that already happened. Unfortunately, schedule-wise, sometimes we can't prevent things like that. But we will talk to the Cubs fan. It's spoiler alert, behind the curtain, continuity, 1990s WCW continuity here. I already pre-taped that segment, and I can tell you that it's a winner. So you guys are really going to enjoy my conversation with the Cubs fan, talking about the 91st Anniversary show coming up this weekend, plus some other Lucha odds and ends. And then we're going to bring in Case Lowe, the young boy, the not so young boy. He's, I've been calling him the young boy for a decade. At some point, you're not young anymore. He's a man at this point, full-time job. He's probably out there banging broads left and right. I don't know, but we're going to bring in the young boy, Case Lowe, and he's going to discuss some Dragongate, which is a promotion I've been struggling with a lot, really, since probably, I don't know, let's say the pandemic. That seems like a decent starting point for my Dragongate struggles. There was a Korakuen Hall show that is getting rave reviews, and I thought to myself, you know what? We kind of been shortchanging Dragongate here on the Flagship the last couple of years, mostly due to me. Kraetsch, he's still kind of into it, but it's hard when you don't have 2 people that are into a topic. It doesn't make for the best audio, so, we've kind of just glazed over the Dragongate. We do the major shows, and because I haven't really been able to get into it, we kind of just, my heart's not really in it, and I think it comes through on the audio. So, we haven't been full bore all in on the Dragongate like we used to be on years past. But with this Korakuen show that I think is getting some rave reviews in a lot of different places, I thought this would be a good spot to bring in one of the 3 foremost Dragongate experts, English-speaking Dragongate experts on this earth. And I would even say, without having knowledge, that those 3 people, of course, Dragongate Jai Church, Case Lowe, and Mike Spears, the hosts of the Open the Voice Gate podcast, one of the longest running podcasts on this podcast network, with Jai obviously being the foremost expert on Dragongate, and Mike Spears and Case Lowe being right on his heels. Those are the 3 foremost experts on the Dragongate system in the world. Certainly English speaking, without question. And we will have Case on the show to bring his expertise and talk some in-depth Dragongate talk, which I feel like this show has been missing for quite some time. And I absolutely pin that blame on myself. But let's get things rolling. All Out, Fall Out. I referenced a few minutes earlier instant reaction with myself and the backup Hangman that we did. Look, we love the show, and I love the show. This is one of my favorite AEW pay-per-views. There's no doubt about it. This had a lot of things that I've been screaming about, and that's heat and hate, and capped off with violence. And I know that a lot of the violence on the show, look, let's face it, this was a dark, gritty, adult show is what this was. This wasn't pro wrestling that, you gather around grandma and the kids and settle in for a night of wacky sports entertainment hijinks. That's not what the pay-per-view was. And I'm, again, I say, much like the Donald Glover gif that people, good. I think American pro wrestling needs more shows like this, not less shows like this. And I acknowledge that it's not for everyone. And I acknowledge that there's, even amongst the sea of pearl clutchers and people who are completely full of shit, the anti-AEW grifting crowd, the hardcore WWE anti-AEW crowd, the podcasters who are desperately clinging to relevance by fading anything that AEW does crowd, even setting all of those goofballs aside. And I've had a long-standing theory for a long time, and I've said this many times, that the more those sorts of people rally against or rail against an AEW show or an AEW direction or an AEW pay-per-view or an episode of Dynamite, in general, the better it probably was. I mean, you look historically, that's almost always the case. And you see all this hand-wringing and pearl-clutching over this show, and, this is so terrible for wrestling, and oh my God, a plastic bag, oh my, and the blood and the cinder blocks and the syringes, and I didn't even like the syringe spot, and all the violence, and, at the end of the day, the harder those types rail against the company, the cooler the thing was that they probably just did. And that has always been the case historically throughout AEW's history, and a lot of it is just, as I said, it's people whose entire identity, or in some cases business models, revolve around just finding angles and ways to be critical of AEW. And in some cases, it's just scary for a lot of people when pro wrestling is presented in a way that they're not used to, because they're 30 years old or whatever, and they became fans when they were 10, and all they know is the sanitized sports entertainment version of pro wrestling that was presented to them by WWE, and they like WWE, and anything that's different is scary. And not the right way to do it. So there's a lot of that too. But even setting those people aside, I do think that there is also a group of good faith criticism towards this show. This style of wrestling is not for everybody. No matter how much I liked it, no matter how much the backup Hangman enjoyed it, okay? No matter how much a lot of you may have liked a lot of what we saw on All Out, I do believe that there are good faith people who are like, you know what? No, this is not for me. And I get it. But again, I also, I think it's, despite that, okay, I do think that doing things that do run against the grain is something that AEW should lean into. And I've talked about that a million times. And if that means hate and heat and violence, that's filling a niche that isn't filled on American television wrestling. And I think it's smart for AEW to fill those sorts of niches. The problem is I have no faith that AEW can ever stick with a singular direction. They always revert back to the old, for lack of a better term, variety show. This utter nonsense that has been spewed for 2 decades that pro wrestling has to be some kind of variety show. And to some extent, I agree with that. Okay, you can't have 11 matches on a pay-per-view that are people power slamming each other into cinder blocks. And you can't do these kinds of shows and these kinds of matches on a week-in, week-out basis. So, to some extent, the variety show term that I hate is kind of true. I do think you have to have some level of variety and on a pro wrestling show, and it can't be the same thing, and you can't just pick one extremely niche direction and hammer it home. But what you can do is be pro wrestling meant for adults that is completely different from the sports entertainment that we already have. The largest pro wrestling company in the world, okay, produces easily digestible sports entertainment, sanitized product, a very specific kind of storytelling, sponsor friendly, all of those things. That we don't need a second company like that. And I think that's where a lot of people are off, in that, these constant comparisons of AEW to WWE. What would be the point and purpose of AEW if it was just another version of what WWE already offers in the marketplace? And that's why I constantly hammer home that point on my Dynamite reviews and in this space and in my writing, that AEW has to try their very best to do everything in a different way than WWE does it. And just eliminate the noise. Don't listen to those groups of people that I referenced a few minutes ago. Fill a new niche. Satisfy a different fan base. You don't have to catch or pass WWE. That's not realistic. They have a 40-year head start. I think, again, the worst thing that ever happened in this discourse was 2001, when AEW's ratings trickled right up and were basically in the same neighborhood as WWE's ratings for a while there, when CM Punk entered the company and Vince McMahon had completely lost the plot and was producing a dog shit product. That was the worst thing that happened to the discourse, because it sort of stoked the flames on this Monday Night War attitude of, if you're not first, you're last, and you're failing and you're dying. That we need to leave fucking 25 years ago now. It's 25 years in the past, and we need to leave it there. We need to leave those kinds of conversations, these low-level, what are they going to do to beat WWE? Those conversations are low-level conversations happening between dolts and snake oil salesmen selling bullshit to those dolts knowingly. We have to be more sophisticated in those conversations. AEW can be successful, wildly successful, without ever challenging WWE's market dominance. It's a miracle that they came so close in one facet of that, television ratings, not in revenue. Okay? Attendance in a few markets, big markets like New York and Chicago, and television ratings. That's where they really challenged WWE for about a year. And I think that really helped to continue to poison the well in the way that we discuss and analyze AEW. So it doesn't necessarily have to be extreme violence or hate and heat, which all culminated on this card. But I do think AEW would be wise to separate themselves from WWE's brand of sports entertainment and stop creeping so closely to it as they are wont to do sometimes, and present more shows like this that are drastically different than what you can get on USA Network. And the reason it worked for the All Out show is this was a perfect storm of feuds and programs that were either being advanced or culminating on this show that warranted the hate and the heat and the violence. I mean, you guys know me. I am not a fan of deathmatch wrestling. I have called deathmatch wrestling the lowest form of pro wrestling, and I truly believe that that's what it is. And I've taken some heat for saying that. I think the least talented people in general tend to gravitate towards deathmatch wrestling. In Japan, the guys that can't cut it, in some of these dojos, they end up gravitating towards deathmatch wrestling. Historically, in the American Indies, it's your less skilled or less charismatic wrestlers that gravitate. In general, it's not, there's obviously some tremendous deathmatch wrestlers historically who were, very charismatic, drew a lot of money. But you kind of get the idea here of what I'm getting at. I don't have a ton of respect for deathmatch wrestling and never have. It's not a form of wrestling that I personally enjoy. It's one of my least favorite forms of wrestling. But I never say that it shouldn't exist. I never say that I don't understand the appeal. I absolutely understand the appeal. Okay, even if it's not my favorite form of wrestling. But that doesn't mean that I don't enjoy wrestling with hate and heat and violence when it's warranted. Because when it's warranted, it's great. And that's what All Out was. That's what All Out was. When you look at the show, everybody's talking about Hangman and Swerve and the big angle with Bryan Danielson and the Chicago street fight with Statlander and Willow. But, there was an opener on this show with MJF and Daniel Garcia where the story was perfect for this type of wrestling. And we saw in the post-match angle where Daniel Garcia got his revenge on MJF by repeating the angle and pile driving him off the top rope and lifting up his bloody head and giving him that kiss on the forehead and throwing him down. And, that's kind of like, that match was so good and the angle was so good. And it's kind of gotten lost in the shuffle with everything that followed it. And then you had Will Ospreay and Pac, who, it wasn't a violent match, but it was certainly a heated feud, and it was built around Pac trying to break this guy's neck. Now, they went out there and had the best wrestling match on the show, right? By a pretty wide margin. And it was pretty great. But that was a different kind of hate and heat. That's the kind of variety show I want. In the Chicago street fight, AEW is a women's deathmatch promotion. It's a women's plunder promotion. AEW is the king, or maybe I should say the queen, of women's plunder. The best matches of nearly every woman on the roster has been a plunder match, whether it's those street fights that Rampage does as their main event a couple times a year, or this match here. We just saw Deonna Purrazzo and Thunder Rosa have their Texas bull rope match or whatever it was in the residency a couple weeks ago on Collision. Britt Baker, had a very famous match against Thunder Rosa. You go right down the line. And this Chicago street fight, I can't even kill you if you thought this was the best match on the show. At worst, it was the third best match on the show. At worst. And the Chris Statlander, Willow Nightingale feud, much like MJF and Daniel Garcia with their big angle, the violence fit the hate and heat of the feud. You can understand why these two people would want to have a street fight and maim each other. And they did. And obviously Hangman and Swerve, not much more needs to be said. Did they go too far? Yeah, maybe for you they did. Okay? But, there's something that I learned in business, and that's not everyone is your customer, and that's okay. Not everyone is your customer, and that's okay. And I think part of the reason that modern WWE just doesn't connect with me is they have the complete opposite tact. Everyone should be our customer. We can appeal to everyone. Well, it certainly doesn't appeal to me, and I know it doesn't appeal to a lot of you. Their plastic, cartoonish, sanitized version of pro wrestling that they don't even call pro wrestling. So it's very important that AEW not only exists, but tries very hard not to be that. We don't need a second version of that. We need this. And I want to love AEW so much. I'm begging to love AEW. And they reel me in every time with shows like this. And, the Mox angle was just, brilliant pro wrestling. Brilliantly executed. That's what I want out of my pro wrestling. You don't like the bag over the head? I get it. I do. A lot of people do. A lot of people can handle that kind of violence and grittiness in their pro wrestling. I want my pro wrestling product to be for adults. When people complain and say, I couldn't have my kid in the room for that. Good. There's plenty for you on Mondays and Fridays, and especially Tuesdays. Do you have to have everything? Can we have something that resembles 1986 Jim Crockett? Can we have something that resembles Mid-South? I mean, we used to call this guy Mid-South Tony. Can we have something that deliberately isn't nice? And that's what this show was. And again, you can't do it every week. You can't do it every month. But it fit. MJF Garcia, it fit. Stat and Willow, it fit. Mox turning on Danielson, it was impactful and it fit what Mox is doing. And Mox is the most interesting person in wrestling right now, bar none. I won't listen to a counter argument or an alternate. He is the most interesting person in wrestling right now. And that is the most interesting story in wrestling and the most interesting direction in wrestling, what Mox is doing. And it feels like that man is motivated and into it for the first time in a long time. And really into what he's being asked to do. And you can tell he's got a lot of creative control on this, which he has earned. And man, he is just a different kind of pro wrestling heel. He's diabolical, he's sinister, without being over the top or cartoonish or resorting to tropes. It's psychological, and it all fits what we've seen from him since he's come into this company and even before. It's just so great. It's so great. And he's going to beat Bryan Danielson, and it's going to be great when he ends Bryan Danielson's full-time career. And then we wait to see what, babyface emerges to take Mox out. I mean, I could not wait for Dynamite this week. I couldn't wait off of this pay-per-view to see what Mox was going to do next. There's an excitement and an unpredictability around it. I don't feel like they're trying to cater to, a segment of fans that you're never going to win over. So push them away. Not everyone is your customer. So we'll see. Again, I don't have a ton of faith in AEW ever sort of sticking with the direction, but this darker, grittier version of the company and what we've saw presented on that pay-per-view and to some extent on Dynamite, I mean, this is just right up my alley and my sensibilities as a fan. And again, that doesn't mean that I want AEW to be a deathmatch promotion. That's really missing the point. That's really missing the point. The point is when the feuds and the angles and the situations warrant it, you go to that playbook and that's when it works. When it doesn't work is on an indie show where people are just there, to get off on watching people bleed and use barbed wire on each other and fall through glass. That's when it doesn't work for me. Or, where it's so gratuitous and over the top and attention seeking. And look, you can make the argument that that's what Hangman and Swerve was. I would argue against it though. I thought everything they did, as extreme as it got, and I didn't like the needle spot. I don't need hypodermic needles in my pro wrestling. I don't. So there were facets of it I thought were a little hokey and didn't work for me. But everything they did was predicated and built on from the feud and the issue that they've been having in the company. You believe that these two men fucking hate each other. And sort of these reactions that people have where, they're these deeply emotional reactions that a lot of people are having to these angles. That's kind of the point, isn't it? Isn't that what pro wrestling is supposed to produce? Isn't pro wrestling supposed to manipulate emotions? I reject this idea that, it's all a show and we're supposed to be in on it and we're supposed to understand it. We're supposed to know that it's safe. Who says? Why? Why are we supposed to know that all of these people are safe? Why? As a viewer, honestly, that's none of our business. So maybe the old work is the new work once again. And it's about eliciting these very emotions that they are eliciting out of people. And unfortunately, again, I feel like this is all a waste of my breath because we're so back, right? They're reeling me back in. But I don't trust them to stick with this with these directions consistently. I don't. We've been fooled before and we'll be fooled again. Tony Khan and his famous research on the sports-based product and how that's what, it was going to work. And they did it for a few months and then it was quickly abandoned as the most recent example. So, but look, I'm going to enjoy the fuck out of this while it lasts. However long it does last. Maybe till next week. Maybe till the next pay-per-view. But man, can I get into this version? This fresh coat of paint, reset button, perfectly crafted and constructed version of Jon Moxley in a promotion where Will Ospreay continues to have the best matches in the world and rise up the card and has matches set up with people like Konosuke Takeshita and Ricochet and Okada setting up a match with Takeshita. It looks like we're finally flipping the switch on Konosuke Takeshita coming off the G1. I mean, MJF gets written off and he's going to come back and we'll see what happens with him and Garcia if Garcia sticks around. And man, there's just so much great stuff happening. Hangman Page is still an insane lunatic. So I'm going to enjoy this while it lasts. That's how I'm approaching this. As we continue to tiptoe towards the new media rights deal, which looks like it's going to happen. I don't think there's really anyone at this point. Even the grifters and your Bischoff types are conceding that the deal is coming. And they're backpedaling and moving their goalposts and whatnot. One interesting element that's been tossed into this as SmackDown finished up on Raw last week, and I thought that Rich Kraetsch wrote a very good piece behind our paywall on, what some people are calling the canceling of SmackDown by Fox, and that's all semantics. Look, I don't know if they were canceled. I mean, the contract came up and Fox had no interest in renewing. I mean, that's the bottom line. Anyone who tells you that Fox had any interest in renewing, they're wrong, because we've got the quotes that directly tell us that Fox wasn't interested in renewing. So if you want to call that a cancellation, I guess you can. I don't want to get caught up in the semantics of whether SmackDown was canceled or not. We know that SmackDown for the 5 years that they were on Fox were almost always number one on Fridays, particularly in the summers during rerun season. But what we also know, and what gets talked about so little, and why Rich thought it was important to write the piece that he wrote, is that despite being number one, WWE almost from the very start did not meet the internal expectations, what was promised to Fox and what Fox was expecting out of the show. That was the case for almost the entirety of the deal. And it started with the very first SmackDown on Fox, which featured The Rock. It featured Brock Lesnar and winning the world title from Kofi Kingston. Huge show, loaded show, barely 4 million viewers. And we spoke about at the time, go check the archives. It's on tape. It's on tape. How that was an ominous number and not a good start, because as we know, when these shows debut, they usually peak right at the start and it's all downhill from there. And starting around 4 million was a bad sign, because those are the kind of numbers that Fox was expecting to generate out of this show, not just to be number one, which was nice. You can't call the deal a total bomb and a complete failure, and I don't think we've ever done that. But the bottom line is Fox was never entirely happy with this deal, almost from the very start. And that 4 million number to start off with was not a good sign. They had The Rock on the show, and they barely did 4 million viewers. And it didn't take very long, just a couple of weeks, for the show to get down into that, 2.5 million viewership range, which produced good enough demo numbers to be number one every week. But, Fox wasn't getting the numbers that they expected to get, and they weren't getting the return on investment that they expected to get. I mean, here's a quote from Lachlan Murdoch, the executive chairman and CEO of the Fox Corporation. This is coming from a Murdoch. So after the news broke that SmackDown would be leaving Fox, here's what Murdoch had to say, quote, I think we've talked about this before, but how we analyze the WWE renewal and we look at all of our sports portfolios the same way, based on the analysis, from an advertising point of view, we were not hitting the advertising numbers due to the audience of WWE to make the return for our return on investment to be above the levels that we would accept. But also, we didn't attribute enough significant retransmission revenue to the WWE either, so it made sense for us to move on from them. They've been a great partner for many years, but just quite simply, we're very disciplined, and the return on investment didn't meet our discipline parameters, so we wish them luck, and we've moved on from them. End quote. I mean, that's as strong as possible with one or two little platitudes thrown WWE's way, but essentially what Murdoch is saying is we tried it, it didn't work, you didn't deliver what we thought we would deliver. Good luck in your future endeavors. As Rich lays out in the article, essentially, that long quote is basically saying, quote, we can't make enough money back on this property, so we're leaving it behind, end quote. And, Fox's discontent with the performance of SmackDown, it came early. This wasn't a decision they made, in the late stages of this deal. A source told Fightful in 2001 that the SmackDown viewing audience was, quote, disappointing in comparisons to expectations, end quote. Let me give that to you again. Disappointing in comparison to expectations, end quote. Because when you're paying $1 billion, over $1 billion over the course of 5 years, you got to make that money back. It's a big time deal. And Fox was disappointed almost from the start and didn't get off to a good start with 4 million viewers. It leveled off around 2, sometimes 2.5 million viewers in a good week. Good enough for number one, but not good enough to make the money back. So they weren't really in play when the deal came to an end. And in fact, on the the idea was we're just going to put college football on the back end of this deal. It's going to do much better ratings and attract much better advertisers. And SmackDown became a lame duck. But now it moves back over to the cable side, where it's going to do great for cable. There's no doubt about that with as hot as the company is. It'll do in the range of what Raw does. It'll do in the range of what the final SmackDown on Fox did, which was what? Something like 1.7 million viewers or something like that. The second lowest number they ever did. And the worst number they ever did in a non, highlight show, clip show version of the show. Because, last week, lame duck, all those things. Those are the kind of numbers they're going to do on cable. They're not going to do the numbers they were doing on network TV on USA. So, WWE is going, ultimately, with this change, they're going to have less viewers, less overall viewers. Despite the fact, that the company is so hot in all of these other ways, the Fox deal just wasn't a great one for Fox. It was a great one for WWE, don't get me wrong. It was a $1 billion deal. But they weren't able to get a raise and continue on Fox, which, was obviously the goal at the start of this thing, and to continue to grow from there. They're kind of retreating back to cable with the SmackDown property. It's funny because could you imagine if there were quotes from WBD executives that sounded like disappointing in comparison to expectations in terms of the ratings that AEW was delivering, right? Like that source at Fox told Fightful in 2021. Could you imagine if that Murdoch quote, and if you replaced WWE with AEW, and you replaced Fox with WBD? Let me frame it to you this way. For how many of you was that the first time you saw that quote from Murdoch? Was Rich's article? When you read Rich's article, or for those of you who are just hearing that quote from me today, for how many of you, hands raised, is that the first time you're hearing this quote from Murdoch speaking on the deal with WWE and how disappointing it was over the life of the deal? For how many of you is this the first time you're hearing that quote that was given to Fightful in September of 2021? Do you think that would be the case if these same exact quotes were attributed to AEW from WBD? Or do you think that these would be the most visible fucking headlines imaginable with YouTube, videos created surrounding these quotes and everything else? And that's just what I'm trying to get. The point I'm trying to make here is just the incredible bias in wrestling media. We never stop hearing about AEW and whether this deal is going to happen and how bad AEW's ratings are. And AEW's ratings have fallen. There's no doubt about it. But could you imagine if WBD executives said some of the things about AEW that Fox executives said throughout the life of their 5-year deal with WWE, and how that would be treated by the vast majority of these wrestling outlets in comparison to how these actual quotes made by Fox in regards to WWE were treated? Basically hidden. Nobody wanted to report them. Because it's not good for business. And the people running these outlets are WWE fans. And they don't want to report negative things about WWE. Not when they're hot. Not when the going's good. And you hear so much about this alleged bias that Dave Meltzer has for AEW. Dave Meltzer, would probably qualify as the least biased person in wrestling media. And there are people, a lot of people, who, if they hear me say that, they probably think I'm insane. But it's true. Because when the rest of wrestling media is so in the bag for WWE, whether literally or figuratively, and mostly figuratively, I'm not suggesting WWE is out here paying outlets or anything like that. There's a bunch that they manipulate like puppets. I've written about it extensively. You all know that. But when so much of wrestling media is in the bag for WWE for various reasons, because they want to handle them with kid gloves, or it's not good for business to report negativity, or, if they put those quotes out there, they get dogpiled by these rabid, psychotic WWE fans, whatever the reasons are, okay? The wrestling media is so biased towards WWE and against AEW that's one of the hardest battles that AEW has to fight. For the slice of market share that they do have, that they have earned. And that much is obvious, whether you're a fan of AEW or not. It's just so obvious why damning quotes like this from a television partner who basically said, no thanks, we're good. Barely register a blip. When you know if it was the other company, it'd be all you heard about for 6 months. So good for Rich for writing that. And good for some of the other, I think Post did something. It's always the same 2 or 3 outlets that can be counted on, to be fair. It's right here with us, or it's Post, or it's WrestleNomics, or it's Dave Meltzer. Toss in Wade Keller if you want, and that's about it. That is about it. when it comes to people who, generally report on this stuff. The business side of wrestling. But what you don't have are these other low-level sites sticking their beak in like they like to do when it's something advantageous to WWE or negative to AEW, sticking their beak in when it's a story like this. And it's quotes like this. You just see it. It's frustrating. Coming off of this is the speculation that AEW could be or is in negotiations with or might have something cooking with Fox. And that's coming off a question asked at the All Out presser to Tony Khan regarding the Shockwave trademark and what that means. And Tony obviously didn't give an answer. He never answers anything anymore. By the way, Tony Khan media appearances, whether they're on podcasts, whether they're on radio shows, whether they're his post-pay-per-view press conferences, where this time I think he spoke for a grand total of like 12 minutes or something. He had RJ City and Matt Menard out there for 40 minutes. He came out for 10 minutes. Answered a token 2 or 3 questions with non-answers and then got the fuck out of there. His pre-pay-per-view media calls. Tony doesn't say anything anymore. He's gotten way too savvy about this. He knows he's going to get aggregated to hell. He knows people are going to twist his words. He knows anything he says is going to be taken in a negative way. I don't blame him in a way. But the bottom line is you almost never get anything interesting out of this guy anymore. He's not the open book he used to be. Okay? Or anything close to it. So he gave a non-answer, but there's a lot of speculation, informed speculation, real and good speculation that, they might have something cooking with Fox. And that it could be that Shockwave as they're preparing to roll out another television show. If this ends up on Fox proper, you're going to get the victory lap to end all. If you think the Kenny Omega G1 victory lap was a big-time victory lap for me, if AEW gets a show on Fox, Network Fox proper, okay, you're getting a 3-hour victory lap because I called that shit years ago. I looked at this disappointing deal with WWE where they weren't getting their money back, and I said to myself, Fox can jump in on these Dynamite negotiations, okay, pay a fraction of the price, and actually make money on the deal, because even if they'll do less viewers, right? If you're getting it at a fraction of the price, it could be a more profitable deal. If Fox wants to stay in the pro wrestling business, they've got AEW right there that they can get at a discount, okay? And actually make money on, as opposed to having to pay $1 billion for WWE and not get back enough advertising revenue to make enough money on the deal. You can make money on an AEW deal. You can make money on Dynamite, right? So they should totally look into that. And a lot of people scoffed at that, okay? And I believe I was the first person to propose that. I know I was. That would be a good idea for Fox if they wanted to stay in the pro wrestling business, right? So now there's this talk that AEW has not only talked to Fox, but might have something serious cooking with them. If it is ever on Fox proper, get the fuck out of the way. This is the victory lap to end all victory laps. But there's a possibility that it could be for FS1 or one of Fox's cable properties or something like that, which, also would be a good deal for AEW to branch out and not only secure a new deal with WBD, but then also secure a second rights deal with a second entity and branch out in that way. It would represent a lot of growth for the company and all of those sorts of things. But getting on network TV after WWE was so unceremoniously shoved off of network TV, and not only that, getting back on the same network period, I mean, that would obviously be a big victory for Tony Khan. Okay, and of course, I don't think Shockwave or even Dynamite, for that matter, would do the same numbers that SmackDown was doing. Of course not on Fox. But, and of course, that would be the center of the discourse, ignoring the fact that, whatever Fox pays AEW is going to be a fraction of what they were paying WWE. And it was, and provided that the ratings are at a level where Fox can make some money, it's going to end up potentially being a better deal for Fox than the WWE deal was. So This is why we're now seeing WWE use very sketchy media outlets, much in the same way that they do with the Fast Nationals and other such nonsense that I've talked about and written about ad nauseum for so long now, to sort of spread just blatant lies and fairy tales. This Andrew Chapados, I think I'm pronouncing that right, who has bylines on a number of outlets and has covered MMA in the past, and we'll get to that in a second. It appears as though TKO has used him to spread some of their fairy tales. He reported earlier this week, and the only reason I'm giving this any oxygen is to make my point, in a tweet that sources close to AEW Warner Brothers Discovery deal tell me AEW was on their back foot, on top of Warner already having about 25% of the original deal, AEW likely had to give up more equity to get the new deal done. AEW apparently didn't receive any other third-party offers, which obviously hurt their negotiations. And ratings have cooled off. Whether or not that's from the product or recent controversial moves remains to be seen. I've reached out to AEW for comment and will update with applicable response, end quote. Of course, AEW didn't reach back out to him because he's reporting fairy tales passed along to him by people at TKO. It's funny that he said AEW apparently didn't receive any other third-party offers, which hurt their negotiations, literally on the same day that the news broke that they had spoken to Fox, from credible sources. Credible sources also immediately debunked basically everything this guy had to say in the tweet. Sean Ross Sapp, Dave Meltzer, you go right down the line. I mean, everything written here is a fairy tale, and you can see it straight from the WWE/TKO playbook when they say things like ratings have cooled off, whether or not that's from the product or recent controversial moves on the heels of All Out, remains to be seen. See, it doesn't matter that any of this is true. It doesn't matter that any of this is based in reality. It doesn't matter that nobody heard of Andrew Chapados before this, even though he's not just some random on Twitter. He does have bylines. He has been involved in MMA media for a number of years, which is, why they used him. Obviously, some of the remnants from this is very similar to the usage of Front Row Brian a few weeks ago. These are obviously old Zuffa MMA contacts that WWE is resorting to put out these fairy tales. In this case, just a total load of fiction. But it doesn't matter, because what happens is the pro-WWE media, the pro-WWE social media accounts and whatnot, they pick this stuff up and they spread it, and then it no longer matters where it's coming from or whether it's true or not. It's propaganda. And in this case, it's eyebrow-raising propaganda. Okay? Because to me, it sort of adds some validity to these Fox rumors. It reads as WWE's trying to get ahead of things here and pour water on what AEW and Warner Brothers and possibly Fox are about to announce. The ratings have cooled off, whether that's from the product or these recent controversial moves remains to be seen. No third-party offers. Putting it out there that, Warner wants more equity in the company to get the deal done, to continue spreading, and that will become truth. The deal will get announced, and I guarantee you see people, high-profile people, your Eric Bischoffs talking about how, the reports that WBD now owns upwards of 25% of the company. And that these figures being bandied about of the total value of the deal aren't true, because this is the game. And this is why they play it. No pun intended. So again, people ask, why do I harp on this stuff? Because somebody has to spread the awareness on it. Someone has to do it. And in fairness, more and more people are doing it. A lot of people came out immediately and debunked this load of shit. People who are in the know, who are, on top of this story. You see more and more people in Twitter comments shitting on stuff like this. The old Legental activity meme. And I think that's great. And I'm going to take my credit for it. And that's why I continue harping on stuff like this. So, anyway, we see if there's any legs to these rumors of AEW doing business with Fox. But be warned, if Shockwave or Dynamite or anything else ends up on Fox proper, okay, it will be the victory lap to end all victory laps. You will never hear a more pompous version of Joe Lanza. I can promise you that. We'll be right back with some New Japan. All right, let's do a little New Japan here. Let's talk about this Road to Destruction tour, which I think has gotten off to a really great start as we lead up to the Destruction in Kobe show on September 29th. That's the Tetsuya Naito Great Okan title defense. It's also going to have David Finlay versus Yoshihashi for the, what do they call that title now? I guess it's the global title. But there's been a number of big-time main events early on this tour, headlining the two Korakuen Hall shows on the 8th and the 9th, and then the 11th in the old Sendai Sun Plaza. There was a big-time main event to headline that show. There's a couple other significant matches coming up on the tour. And I'm not going to do full reviews of the shows or anything like that. I've watched everything. I'm going to go over some bullet points and some observations and some of the newsworthy bits of what we've seen from New Japan here, coming off of the G1 Climax, coming off of Capital Collision. By the way, I have lied to all of you. I'm not going to review Capital Collision. I feel like it's old news now, so we're not going to get around to that. We're moving forward. We're going to move forward to this Destruction tour and cover that for you until we get to the Destruction in Kobe on the 29th. So the tour kicked off on September 8th, back-to-back shows in Korakuen Hall. The first of which was headlined by that was the TV title match with Jeff Cobb and Yota Tsuji. That drew 1,384 fans. And the very next night in Korakuen, that one was headlined by the never openweight title match with Hanare defeating Hiromu. That one drew 1,190, which I think was a little bit of a disappointing number. But look, you've got Hanare on top. I understand it's Hiromu, okay? But Hanare isn't any kind of established star or draw or anything like that, although they are trying to build him up. And I think this match, which was a great match, is going to go a long way in doing so. And then a couple of nights later on the 11th, they put 1,126 fans, less than the Korakuen shows, into the Sendai Sun Plaza for Doki versus Taiji Ishimori for the junior title. So these three early shows on the tour with some significant title matches headlining each one before they head up to Hokkaido, up by Sapporo. They're running one show in Sapporo and then a bunch of shows in the Hokkaido area of Japan up north. What is it? I think it's something like 7 shows up there, and there isn't much of significance going on the 14th, and that's the first show in Hokkaido. There is a never openweight trios title match. Tanahashi, Oleg Boltin, and Toru Yano defend against Dick Togo, Evil, and Yujiro. I would expect the champions to retain. I don't think they're going to put a title on Dick Togo. At this stage of Dick Togo's career, he's basically in the Gato Jado manager role. But, even with it being the lowest level title in the company, I still think the champions will retain there. But outside of that, there's really not much going on those 7 shows right now in Hokkaido. And then they come back from that swing for the Destruction in Kobe show on the 29th. But let me get you guys caught up on what has happened on the 3 key Road 2 shows on the tour. And we will start with the first Korakuen, which was on the 8th. Actually, why don't I do this? There's a couple bullet points I want to hit before I talk about the shows in specific. Number 1, there's the 2 young lions, Daiki Nagai and Masatora Yasuda. Now, Masatora Yasuda, he's the son of Luchador Zombido. Okay, so he's got some bloodlines to him. These 2 guys debuted. I don't know. I don't think they wrestled on the G1 tour. I think they debuted back in June on the Seoul shows, on the New Japan Seoul shows. Then they went away for a little while. They may have wrestled on a couple of the back-end G1 shows. I'm not sure. But They're basically opening up a lot of the shows on this tour. And let me tell you something. I love these guys. I think they are a step ahead at the same stage of development of the last couple of class of young lions that we've seen. This Daiki Nagai, he looks like he's probably going to be a junior. I love his fire. I mean, this kid has such incredible fire. And Yasuda, he's got the bloodlines, which they are pushing in the company. They're acknowledging who his father is. Okay? And he's got good size and a good look. These two guys, they just look. Now, I love the young style, the young lion style of work. This is like my preferred style of how to lay out a match and work. It's simple. It's intense. It's wrestlers always going for the win. I love the way that, I've always loved these young lion openers. But these two guys in particular are really standing out to me. It feels like, and it's really early, and it's super hard to project these things, but I really feel like they might have something in both of these guys, at least from a bell-to-bell standpoint. And Yasuda looks like a guy who can really develop some charisma, and he obviously understands the wrestling business as it's the family business and all of those things. But Nagai, the junior, I mean, he just shows so much fire. And the match they had on the 8th, I'll focus on that one. It was a great underdog story, right? With the junior fighting from underneath, and they go to the time limit draw. Basically, they go to a time limit draw every time they wrestle, and they swap. One guy will have one in the crab, and the match will hit the 10-minute mark. The next match, the other guy will have the guy in a submission, usually a crab, and the match will hit the 10-minute mark. So they kind of take turns, almost beating the other. But don't skip these. I think both of these guys really have something. I've been super impressed with both of them. Point number 2, Jacob Austin Young has debuted on this tour as part of United Empire. This one came out of left field. This is a guy in his 30s. He's been a California indie wrestler for a long time. It's too early to assess how he's doing in New Japan or on this tour. I've made it a point to watch all of his matches. He hasn't really stood out yet. With that said, he's also not showing those nerves that a lot of people show on their first New Japan tour. He's not nearly as nervous as like a Chase Owens was when they first brought him in as the NWA Junior Champion. He's not unsure of himself and lacking confidence the way Dan Maloney did when they first brought... Can you imagine Drilla Maloney lacking confidence? But if you go back and watch his first few matches when they brought him in, I think for that Super Juniors tour, when he was part of United Empire before they did the angle where he turned on those guys to join Bullet Club War Dogs, it was very clear that he, and that happens to a lot of people who have their first New Japan tour. I don't see that with Jacob Austin Young, or Jay, as they're calling him. I don't see that necessarily with him, but I also don't see him standing out. He just feels like a jag right now. But as always, you got to give these guys time to kind of acclimate and get in the mix and find their footing and find their comfort zone and all of those things. Okay, next point. Mad Bastards. This is the tag team with Gabe Kidd and Jake Lee, which they rolled out on this tour. And they won some matches. They beat Tomoaki Hanma and Tomohiro Ishii on this show on the 8th. And it really looked like this was going to be a tag team they were going to get behind and push. And I think deservedly so. If you're going to sign Jake Lee, okay, and you're going to put him with the War Dogs and you're going to team him with someone with a lot of upward trajectory like Gabe Kidd, I think the idea here was to give them a push. I wouldn't have been stunned if they ultimately would have ended up being the tag team champions or, winning the tag league and maybe challenging for those belts at the Dome, or they were going to do something with this tag team. Well, Jake Lee ends up getting hurt on the show in Sendai, and just, the finish was hilarious because what you had was Hiroki Goto, Tomohiro Ishii, and Yoshihashi versus David Finlay, Gabe Kidd, and Jake Lee. Okay? And Jake Lee gets injured on the outside. He took a bump off of the apron, and it looked like he blew out his knee. I haven't seen an update on this, but he was taken out, and it doesn't look good. Okay? And this is a company that's had a bevy of injury issues. Ren Narita, they announced that he is now injured, and it looks like they were setting him up for a future title match with Jeff Cobb, but now he's on the shelf. Yuya Uemura is going to be out for like whatever it is, 9 months or whatever with the injury he suffered at the G1. And now it looks like Jake Lee is out. He was on the floor being tended to as this match went on. And then Hiroki Goto hits a brain buster on, not even really a brain, but they were calling it a brain buster. It was really just a vertical suplex, which I guess is the same thing. I think of the brain buster as sort of dropping straight down, sort of like the old Coco Beware gourd buster or ghost buster, right? And the way Ishii does it, he kind of drops the guy in his head, but really doesn't. What Goto did here was really what you would think of the old vertical suplex, right? But in Japan, you know, they scream brainbuster every time somebody does that. But anyway, Goto hits this vertical suplex on Finlay, and the referee hesitates in between the 2 and the 3 count. I said Finlay, he was actually Kid. Kid doesn't kick out, so the ref counts, right? He slaps the mat for 3. And then Hiroki Goto jumps up off the mat all surprised. And he's like, what? No! Like, I think he literally went, what? No! Right? Because he knew that wasn't the finish. But it's like, Hiroki, you're a veteran. Kayfabe, brother. Obviously something went wrong here, okay? So I don't think they were supposed to win the match. At minimum, that wasn't supposed to be the finish. And Goto was just like shocked and angry at the referee because he counted the 3 on this, you know, nondescript vertical suplex, and the announcers were on top of things. They're trying to cover for this because they're screaming, brainbuster, you know, like he hit him with this devastating brainbuster. So I don't know what the fuck happened here. I don't know if Lee was supposed to be in the finish somehow, and Gabe Kidd panicked and just decided, you know what, I'm just going to eat the pin, and we're going to get the fuck out of here. All I know is Goto wasn't expecting this. So whether Kidd called an audible on his own, and it didn't get communicated properly, the referee wasn't in on it, and Goto wasn't in on it. I can promise you that. So whether Kidd called an audible on his own, or Kidd genuinely got his bell rung on the suplex, that I don't know. Okay? What I do know is Kidd was tweeting in the aftermath. He made some tweets talking about Lee's injury, and as long as he could drink lemon sours with him and party, that you know. So he did some in-character tweets regarding Lee's injury, so I think Kidd is okay. I think Kidd just went into business for himself there, and Goto didn't know what the hell was going on, and neither did the ref, but the ref did his job properly. But bottom line here is Lee is out, and that cuts short, if he's out for a significant length of time, what I think was going to be a push tag team here. Okay? The other big news and the fourth thing, before I'll break down some of these matches, was Zack Sabre Jr. was pinned by Sonata in a tag match in Sendai. So you had Sonata and Taichi defeating Zack Sabre Jr. and Kosei Fujita, but it was Sabre who took the pin and not Fujita. Okay, that's the big news. So they announced it's going to be Sonata versus Zack Sabre Jr. at Royal Quest. And the Royal Quest show is after Destruction in Kobe. It's, what's the date on Royal Quest? It's after King of Pro Wrestling. It's November 20th. So Destruction in Kobe is the end of September. Then the King of Pro Wrestling tour, which is kind of a brief tour. And that'll have the King of Pro Wrestling show on October 14th. Remember, that's where Zack is challenging Naito or Okan, to be fair, for the title. So here's the deal. He's wrestling Sonata at Royal Quest 6 days later, no matter what, in London, in the Crystal Palace. If he defeats Naito 6 days earlier, that's going to be a title match based on the fact that Sonata beat him in Sendai. Okay? If Naito retains, it's just going to be a one-on-one grudge match between Sonata and Zack Sabre Jr. So what does this tell us? I mean, to me, this tells us Zack is beating Naito. I don't know if you have Sonata beat Zack, right, ahead of a title challenge, and then just beat Zack again with Naito, and then have Zack wrestle Sonata on the Royal Quest show. That, I mean, talk about going out limping off of a G1 win. That doesn't make any sense. The big payoff to winning the G1 is getting beat by Sonata in a tag, losing the title challenge that you asked for early, and then beating Sonata, of all people, in a singles match in England. That doesn't make any sense. This guy's beaten Naito at King of Pro Wrestling, and he's beating Sonata at Royal Quest. I mean, that's what this tells us. They've really tipped their hand here to me. I'd be surprised if there's any other path now. So, that's the other big news to come out of this. And the other thing is the TMDK is introducing a new member at some point here. And with Ryohei Oiwa wrestling his final match of his Noah excursion against Kiyomiya on the 14th, which is, I believe that's Saturday. So that match is coming up. And we'll review that match next week. That's the biggest match that Noah has right now. Keito Kiyomiya versus Ryohei Oiwa. And they're going to do that on Saturday, and they are already billing that as Oiwa's final Noah match. Watch Oiwa beat him. I know that sounds crazy. You can't put anything past Noah and their horrendous booking. The worst booked company that isn't AAA, basically in Major League Wrestling, is Pro Wrestling Noah. But yeah, obviously Kiyomiya needs to and should win that match and send Oiwa packing back to New Japan. But the question is, obviously people are making the obvious connection. Is he the new TMDK member? And it would all line up, right? So we'll have to see. But yeah, so that's kind of the news bits coming off the early part of this tour. And look, I think at this point, Zack Sabre Jr., I think he's winning this title. So we'll have to let it play out. All right, let's talk about some of these matches. So on the 8th, we had Jeff Cobb versus Yota Tsuji for the TV title. And they went to the 15-minute time limit, but what was interesting is it was Jeff Cobb on the verge of winning before he put Tsuji away. It was a good match, not a great match, and I was surprised. I thought this was a good spot to put the title on Yota Tsuji. He's obviously the guy they like of this young crop, and I think putting that TV title on him when I saw this match announced would be a good idea, and then he can get, a variety of wins over people in these short sprints, but they went with the time limit draw here, and they did it in such a way where it wasn't Tsuji on the verge of winning, which would have put over Tsuji without putting him over, so to speak. But it's the other way around, right? It was like, oh, Cobb was about to beat him, right? So you're almost, in a weird way, still protecting Tsuji because he didn't lose. But then you're like, all right, are we getting a rematch? No, and Ren Narita comes out and attacks everybody. So, and I think Ren Narita got hurt after this, so I think he's out of the picture now. But either way, Tsuji, in what was a surprise to me, did not win the title. So we keep an eye on that now that Narita's out of the picture, what they're actually going to do. I haven't seen any follow-up on the Ren Narita injury other than he was just going to miss the Sendai show. So, they might have to go in a different direction now for Jeff Cobb. But, yeah, so let's move on to the show the next night on the 9th. That was the Jacob Austin Young had the singles match. He beat the young boy Shoma Kato in a short bout. Again, I kind of went over my thoughts on Jacob Austin Young. I'm going to need to see more. And the main event of that show is really what I want to focus on. That was Hanare defeating Hiromu Takahashi in a never open weight title match. And I thought this was just a phenomenal match. And I thought Hanare, he's had some really great matches against guys like Tomohiro Ishii and some others. He's had some G1 matches that were pretty good, but I think this is the best Hanare match that he's had yet in the company, and it was an ideal match of this type, right? It's a never open weight title match with a junior challenging this big bruising heavyweight, and Hanare just beat the living shit out of Hiromu, and he's the perfect opponent to do that to because Hiromu takes great bumps, and he's very sympathetic when he's in there versus heavyweights. That's something he's very good at. And it was an ideal match of this type with a heavyweight defending a title versus a junior, where there were some great hope spots. Sometimes that term gets thrown around when it shouldn't be. I'm guilty of it too. But there were some truly great hope spots in this match with Hiromu trying to come back against this big bruising opponent. And there were great details, I thought, on the finish as well, where Hanare picks up Hiromu to deliver his finish. I forget what he calls it. And Hiromu is throwing these rabbit punches to Hanare's ribs because he knows with the beating that he just took And if he gets hit with this move, he's fucking done. And it was sheer desperation, and there's no way that these little rabbit punches are going to stop Hanare, but Hiromu is throwing him anyway. And I love that attention to detail. This was such great work from both guys all the way through. And the crowd for this match, in all the right ways, a typical Korakuen Hall crowd, they were at a fever pitch for this match at all of the right times when they should have been. So just a great story told by Hanare and Hiromu, paced perfectly, and they had this crowd in the palm of their hands for this match. And Hiromu was the perfect opponent for this. Set aside the fact that Shingo came out and made the next challenge, okay? I don't know if he made a challenge, but he came out for his pal and he stared down Hanare. It's obvious that that's where they're going for the next title match. Set that aside, you know, that's leading to another match with a stablemate. Just from the standpoint of if you're going to do this kind of match and headline it in Korakuen, you can't find a better opponent, a better junior opponent for a heavyweight like Hanare than Hiromu. This is the perfect kind of match for him, and he always works these kinds of matches very well. I've seen some match of the year talk for this, so some people are very high on it. I'm not quite that high on it, but I don't think like 4.5 is crazy. It really was some great pro wrestling in front of the right crowd too, which I think is a big key here. And then on the 11th, we had Sendai. You know, I talked a lot about it already. You know, Sonata pinning Zack Sabre Jr. and the injury to Jake Lee are some of the big news bits to come out of this. But I don't want people to overlook Dookie in his title defense against Taiji Ishimori. You know, Taiji Ishimori, you'd be hard pressed to find a more stale New Japan act than Taiji Ishimori. Okay, he's a stale act, and you know, I was not looking forward to this match, but it absolutely delivered. And of the 3 title matches that we saw in these 3 shows, you know, I'd put Hanare Hiromu number 1 pretty easily, but this is number 2. I thought this was a better match than Jeff Cobb and Yota Tsuji. I thought Ishimori had one of his more interesting matches than he's had in quite some time, and Dookie has proven to be, look, this is a guy who forced his will on the company and earned his push through solid work. Let's be honest. When they brought this guy in as an injury replacement for the Super Junior 4 or 5 years ago, they never planned on pushing this dude. He was a pin eater for a good length of time, but he earned this push. And he went out there and had an excellent junior title match against a guy that I think has been stale and who is kind of just this requisite, the fallback, generic junior title challenger, Taiji Ishimori, who they just, you know, they pull out of the fucking weeds every time someone wins this title, and he's the first challenger. And there's just no juice around him at all. And Dookie goes out there and just has an excellent match with this guy and beats him clean and all those things. And you know, I thought there was some concern. Look, I thought, you know, I thought that all 3 of these titles had a chance to change hands, and none of them did. You know, I would have bet money that Tsuji was going to beat Cobb, and that didn't happen. I thought Hiromu had a shot because there's always this idealized, you know, vision that Hiromu's going to move up to heavyweight. I don't think that's ever happening. And I was a big proponent of that for a long time. I don't think that's coming. So maybe winning the Never title is a step in that direction. So there was a chance he could have won. And just the fact that I thought, okay, Dookie got his gold watch, so to speak. His pat on the back, thank you for the good work. His you know, short title run. And then we're just going to go back to what's comfortable. And that's Taiji Ishimori. The ultimate comfortable fallback option. It all made sense, right? But they didn't do a title change in any of these matches. And, you know, and I thought all 3 of them, you know, the Cobb-Tsuji match was a good match. This junior title match was a very good match. And Hanare Hiromu was an excellent match. A borderline match of the year caliber match. So, 3 very good title matches with surprising results to some degree in all 3 cases as this tour moves along. On Saturday, as I said, we've got the never open weight title match Tanahashi, Bolton, and Yano versus the House of Torture guys. I would, that one's not going to be in even the same universe of quality of the matches we just saw. They're also doing a Rambo match with they're pulling Takashi Iizuka out of the mothballs. So when's the last time he actually wrestled a match? He did he was a surprise entrant in the King of Pro Wrestling version of the Rambo at Wrestle Kingdom this year, right? And that's the last match he had since his retirement before the pandemic, and and Taichi taking over the Iron Glove and everything. So he's gonna have his second match this year. They're doing a comedy Rambo match on this show as well. It's gonna be on New Japan World, so I think that'll be worth checking out. Kazushi Sakuraba's on the show, teaming with Toru Yano against the two young boys I talked about at the top. So they're doing some interesting things on that first show up in Hokkaido, and I don't even think there's much announced for the rest of the shows that they're doing up there, the other 6 shows before they come back on the 29th for Destruction in Kobe. So, and then, this is an interesting development with Sabre. I don't think there's any way he doesn't win the title now. I think they just tipped their hand. So I think a week later in Saitama, I think Zack is going to beat Naito. Well, actually, no, not a week later in Saitama. What am I talking about? 2 weeks later in King of Pro Wrestling is not in Saitama. It's in Sumo Hall. Zack is going to beat Naito. I don't think Okan's going to beat Naito. But I think Okan's match with Naito coming up in Kobe is an important match for Okan, because I think people will now, this is the first step in people seeing him at another level. He's done a good job with the King of Pro Wrestling title. I was a big Okan booster for a long time. And even I, before the G1, if you go back and listen to the G1 preview, had kind of given up. I'm like, it's never going to happen. And then he has the great G1, and he's in the mix at the end, and now he's getting a title match, and after beating Naito and all that. And it is going to happen. They are elevating him to some extent. So, and let me say one more thing. This King of Pro Wrestling title, give some of these guys credit. This could have been just a throwaway title, and I know they do a lot of goofy stuff with it, but Taichi owned the fuck out of that thing. Shingo owned the fuck out of that thing. And the great Okan has owned the fuck out of that thing and made the most of it, right? To where it's like, because of their hard work and the effort that they've put into that title, I don't think it's like viewed as the joke that people were viewing it as when it was like centered around Toru Yano and people like that, and Okada not taking it seriously. So it's a good example in pro wrestling. You put your heart into something and really believe in it. And as we've seen here with Okan, he's gonna he's having a fucking title shot in a couple of weeks here in Kobe on a big show. And he's probably gonna lose, but I don't think that's really gonna be the point. All right, when we come back, we'll have the Cubs fan, and we're going to preview the CMLL Anniversary show. All right, I'm here with Cubs fan of the great Luchablog, and he's going to help us preview this CMLL Anniversary show coming up this weekend. I believe it's 91st anniversary this year. Why don't we start here? The business side of things. So I understand this show is a sellout and sold out rather quickly. I think I was following along on your Twitter and on the Lucha blog, and I think they had a handful of tickets in like the club section or the restaurants or something, and that small handful of tickets went. So this show is going to be a big success, right?
Yeah, they essentially sold out at the end of August, so they sold out about 2 weeks ahead of time, which was not quite as fast as they did last year, but still far ahead of most years. They had those really expensive seats, and it seemed like they were maybe slipping on a few extra seats that they were jacking up the prices at the last second, and that's why things took a little bit while. But they're going to make out like bandits on this show.
So we all know they've been pretty hot in Arena Mexico, but do you get the sense that this is because things are running hot, or do you think if it wasn't an attractive lineup that they would have maybe not sold this show out, or maybe taken a little longer to sell it out? I guess this is my long-winded way of asking you, do you think the strength of the card was a factor in the ticket sales going so well?
I think it's at this point more that it's the anniversary show, and like we talked about with Triple Mania last month, there's a big draw in that being everyone knows that's the big show for the promotion in the city for the year. But I do think but that'll only get them so far. That'll get them like 12,000 seats, and it's like the difference between having a really good night and having an excellent night is having a very strong lineup. And I think the attraction of bringing in Jericho, of having the mass match, pushes them to sell and pushes it a little faster to get to that sellout.
All right, so let's start with Jericho then. We'll start right at the top with Jericho and Mystico. So kind of walk people through who might not understand or might not know, a lot of American fans, particularly online American fans, there's sort of this vocal minority, I would call it, I guess is the best way to put it, that are very anti-Jericho for a variety of reasons that we don't have to get into here because they're not relevant to this show. That doesn't exist in Mexico from what I understand. They see him as a pro wrestling legend, a returning legend to Arena Mexico and all those sorts of things, right? Right,
yeah. I am actually, as we speak, finishing up a preview that I'll have probably on Voices of Wrestling, maybe tomorrow. Maybe, I understand Rich is probably, in some swanky hotel or climbing some giant mountain or whatever he does. But if someone puts it up, you'll be able to see this preview that I wrote. And in my mind, Chris Jericho, he means a lot to Mexican fans as they see him as a big ex-WWE star. But to CML itself, he's the guy who came there, was like, don't want to be too mean about it, but he was nobody before he started around the time he came to CMLL. And then he went off and became like a top of the industry guy. So they see him as proof what their training, what going through their system, wrestling in their matches can turn out to a guy. And like, in a way of thinking, he is the CMLL wrestler with the greatest WWE success of all time, because there are other Mexicans who have been champions in WWE, but they weren't really CMLL wrestlers. And there's other Mexicans who have gone from CMLL, but they have not gone as far as Jericho. So they see him as like a representative of what coming to their promotion can do for wrestling.
So it's like a prideful thing almost. They almost see him as this homegrown guy who went on to become an even bigger worldwide star.
Exactly, that's it. That's why they have his photo in Arena Coliseum, because they want to show him as someone who came from there to go on to greatness, and for something for like the kids in their school. This is what you can achieve if you stick with us and you work hard.
So definitely not a scenario where it's like Chris Jericho politicking his way into an anniversary show main event, based on, his relationship with Tony Khan or Rocky Romero or something like that. This is legitimately a big deal for this show.
Yes, this is, in my view, this is like the biggest name in CMLL's eyes they could get from AEW because of that history and because of what he's gone on to do.
Wow. Okay. So, as far as the mask match goes, this one to me came out of left field. You have Hechicero, Valiente, Euphoria, and Esfinge. This is not something I saw coming together for this. Of course, you're the expert. What do you make of this? I mean, do you feel like they felt like they didn't need a big time mask match because you have the match we just talked about with this returning hero who they see, as this homegrown mega star versus the biggest star in the company on top, where maybe they can get away with a bit of a lesser mask match, a 4-way, no huge stars involved? Or am I underestimating the value of this semi-main event?
No, I think you're right where it's a lesser main event, especially compared to Templario and Dragon Rojo last year, which was like a year-long feud of those guys having history with each other.
Right.
And then the year before that, we had the 4-team tournament where you had like some dream matchups, and you had Lances Jr. and Stuka Jr., who weren't as important, but at least had history all year. These guys, like, it's a 4-way, but even like the first two guys feuding did not start until the exact moment they announced that when the anniversary was happening. They did a segment where they revealed the date, and then the next match, Esfinge and Euphoria just started feuding out of nowhere. So it's like it doesn't have too much length to it. And these are guys, I think, speaking on an interview with Masutra, I was listening to the other day, we talked about that all four of them are guys who wrestle stars, but they are not the stars themselves. That's what they all want to be. So I think there's a conceit that these are not the top guys. I don't think they did a lesser main event because they knew they had Jericho and on the card, because before they were doing the Jericho angle, they started a Volador Jr. Inferno feud that's clearly supposed to be like a hero match and probably on the show. So I think the Jericho match is just an upgrade over that match, but they were always going to do the four-way. I think they just wanted to do something different because the one commonality with those two feuds with Dragon Rojo, Templario, and Stuka Jr. and Atlantis Jr. is that you kind of knew who was going to win and who was going to lose their match. It was the young guy versus the veteran who's maybe not at the end of his career, but clearly one guy's going up and one guy is not going up. With this one, you have four guys who are about on the same tier on CMO's depth chart. So in their mind, it's harder to figure out who's going to win in this match.
Yeah, and because there's like no super hot feud coming into it, it's more like it's four upper mid-carder types, and sort of the appeal here is just the mystery of which one is going to unmask. Right. And sort of which one is going to take the step forward, because whoever wins this is at least can claim that now they are an actual star because they won the mask at the biggest show of the year. So it's who's going to lose their mask and who's going to actually get elevated from this win. Yeah, I mean, I think when you put it that way, there's probably a lot of people then who'd be rooting for Hechicero, who I like to compare to Tomohiro Ishii in that he seems to have gotten over and been more popular with the non-CMLL fan, right? More so than in Arena Mexico or in his home promotion, because he was sort of a cult favorite among the super grimy, hardcore wrestling fan before he ever had anything resembling a push. And he's gotten over in the UK. They love to use him in Rev Pro, and they use him well in Rev Pro. Tony Khan loves to put him in prominent spots on TV whenever he has a chance to use them. He's featured on the Fantasticomania shows in Japan, and it seems like he doesn't get pushed quite as hard in his home base. Could this be a sign that CMLL is finally really genuinely getting behind him? I would like that to be the case. I think they just see him. I think the reason in his matches they don't see him as a big deal, but they see him as a guy who's on the level of these three guys who aren't that big of deals outside of Mexico. I mean, Hechicero, in talking about this match, has talked about like he hasn't had that big moment in Mexico, that he's gone around the world and had matches that have gotten big ovations, but he feels like he's missing that here, and that's his motivation to be in this match, to finally have that big moment in Mexico. But I think they just I think he was a convenient name who fit the slot, who has history at Euphoria because they were a trio a couple years ago before and that they can rely in this match to get over and have a good match. But I don't know that this is the occasion that they're going to get behind him. Yeah, that's true. Didn't they have that big breakup angle? Was that earlier this year or was that late last year? It was late last year where they were Los Infernales, and then they teased, and then Mephisto and Euphoria turned on Hechicero, and it seemed like it was going to be a big feud, but then they just slide Averno in Hechicero's spot and moved on. So it didn't seem like something they were going to follow up on, but it's a thread that they pulled back in for this mask match. Okay, so have they kind of worked that into this four-way mask match, that history, or no? Yeah, they have. Euphoria explained that Hechicero was a terrible partner to him to begin with, and that's why he joined on. So they are bringing that up. Good. That's good. So do you have a decent feel for what they're going to do here, or is this just impossible to predict? Okay, well, the one thing that I need to get across, and I probably need to find multiple ways to get across, is these are like CMLL Galaxy Brain rules for this match, which I don't think people understand, because everyone's used to what AAA does and what other lucha promotions do, where it's four people, and then as you win, you get eliminated from the match, and then the last person gets
loses a mask, and CMLL has to do things their own way. They have to make them a little tougher for no reason. In this match, it'll be a 4-way, but the first 2 people who get beat are out of the match completely. They go to the back, they're not involved at all. And then it's the last 2 people left have the people beat who've won so far will have a straight up mask versus match. And the winner of that wins, the loser of that unmasks. So they're like, it's the kind of like the second best guy in the match is the person who's going to get unmasked instead of like the 4th, if that makes any sense.
Right. So instead of the traditional pro wrestling psychology of where you want to get out of this match as soon as possible, right? Because you don't want to lose your mask. So the traditional psychology would be if you score a pinfall, you should be the one that gets out of the match, right? But this is kind of reverse psychology where it's like it's sort of like machismo psychology where no, I am willing to put up my mask because I want to be the one to take somebody's mask. So right. Yeah, which is
Euphoria explained it. It's like you want to be in the record books as having won the mask on the anniversary. So you want to win your way to that opportunity. If the 2 people who lose first and just go to the back, no one's even going to remember that they were in the match a year or 2 from now. So the motivation is that you want to be involved in the last 2.
And that kind of, that makes sense both in kayfabe and reality, right? Because if there's some big memorable moment where someone loses their mask here, I mean, he's right. The 2 guys who were eliminated, people are going to have trouble 20 years from now recalling who they were, whereas everyone's going to remember who the last 2 guys were. Obviously the person who loses the mask and hopefully the person who takes the mask. So, I kind of see it. I kind of understand that methodology too, and sort of the psychology behind this way as well. It's definitely 2 different ways you can do this kind of match, and you can certainly debate the positives and negatives. But yeah, as far as predicting, it's too hard based on the slotting.
I don't think so. It's because if watching the matches, it sticks out that like Valiante is coming back from having a serious knee injury, I think 2 years ago. He spent most of the year out. He came back maybe late last year, and like he's not the same guy. He was always a guy who got by on his agility, on his spectacularness, and that's just not there for him anymore. They've turned him Rudo as part of the build up to this feud, which is probably a good idea for him long term because it won't demand as much. But he seems like a guy who, like, Father Time came for him very suddenly. And it would be like, if he does not lose his mask this year, he might not be in a great position to lose his mask in another big show down the line. So he kind of feels like the most likely loser. The other candidate really is Euphoria. When CML does these multi-person feuds, it's usually like the 2 people who started or 2 people ended. In this case, the 2 people started with Euphoria and Esfinge. And Esfinge is much younger than Euphoria. So like by CML math, Euphoria is the guy who's probably going to lose in those situations. But Valiante has just been like a shadow of his former self that I like. If he wasn't agreeing to lose his mask, they should be trying to talk him into it at this point.
Okay. So it sounds like if you had to handicap it, you would go Valiante 1, Euphoria 2, Esfinge 3, and Hechicero 4.
Yeah, I like Hechicero seems like the least likely, just because like there's no reason to change his look and change his character right when he's having an international breakout.
Right. All right, let's talk about the rest of the card a little bit. We'll circle up to the top. So we've got a couple of trios matches to open things up if what I'm looking at is the actual order. So we've got Futuro, Max Star, and Hombre Bala Jr. versus, I'm going to get this right for the first time ever on the first try. And I didn't, of course. Los Depredadores. You do it.
Los Depredadores.
Los Depredadores. Magia Blanca, Magnus, and Ruido. Magnus and Ruido, I think, are still those Mexican tag team champions for like over a year now, right?
That's correct. And Magia Blanca has a random CML title too. The other team just came together in the last couple months. They weren't a team, but they won the national trio style, so they decided, I guess we're a team now. They're kind of a mirror of the Rudo team, where we have two prospects in Futuro and Max Star, and one guy who CML tried to push at one time. He kind of messed up his career, and after many years, they're giving him another chance in Hammervala Jr. So they're two teams that should fit well together. They're probably not going to get a lot of time in that position, but they had a match a couple Fridays ago that was pretty good.
Okay. Yeah, and it's a 7-match show too, which is a little unusual and probably just for the anniversary. The second trios would be Star Jr., Neon, and Templario versus Soberano Jr., Angel de Oro, and Diablo Rojas. So Templario and Soberano Jr., obviously two of the breakout stars last year. It's good to see them on the anniversary show. Before you kind of break down that match, do you see any major snubs in terms of people that you thought deserved a spot on the anniversary show who aren't on it this year?
The biggest name that's out is Barbaro Cavernario. It feels like he should be on this card someplace, but without booting some of the foreigners out, it's tough to tell where you would actually put him on this show. There are people like Averno was just in a great match on last Friday, and he feels weird that he's not involved in this. There are women that CML has pushed hard all year who aren't in this, because we only have one woman booked from CML. But after that, it's like you can debate if you want to have Zanakan Jr. or Volano 3 and his brother instead of the Depredadors. So a lot of people about the same level that you could probably have just as good card with, but Cavernario is really the biggest one that sticks out.
Do you think it's like a vote of confidence that Futuro and Neon both got on this show? They were kind of breakout guys last year as the new trendy high flyers. We got Neon getting, booked in Rev Pro as their cruiserweight champion this year. And they were actually a tag team when they first started getting booked in Arena Mexico, but they've kind of like had separate paths. But do you see that as a vote of confidence for those two guys?
Yeah, especially for Futuro, especially Neon, because that second match is just people we want to get on the card with no real purpose of being them on the card. So Neon, Star Jr., they could have been replaced by other people, but they clearly, those are guys that they're high on to put them in that position. I think they're trying to soft break up that Futuro Neon team by putting Futuro with the new trio and having Neon do his own thing. But I think they're high on still on Futuro, and they're high on trying to get that new trio out.
Yeah. So how do you feel about kind of splitting up Futuro and Neon?
I think Neon's so good that I feel like I understand why they moved him up, but I don't think that Futuro is working with his strongest wrestlers now that he's without Neon. But at his size, it may be a little bit slower for him to move up.
All right. So what's your takeaway on this second trios? Is just getting some people who are reasonably big stars on the card, or is there something that for people who are going to watch this, they should be looking for?
It's mostly just getting people on the card, but Angel de Oro and Diablo Roja are defending their tag team pals against Star Jr. and Atlantis Jr. on Tuesday. So maybe they will have some slight build up in that direction.
Okay. So you mentioned there was a lot of women that they've pushed this year, but there was only room for one of their native women to be on the show to challenge and probably beat Willow Nightingale for the CMLL women's title. Why did they go the direction they went, do you think?
I think they picked Zeuxis because they need someone on the Ruda side with the title. All the other contenders are really Technica, so you make the most matches that way. I think they wanted to get Zeuxis more attention to replace Stephanie Baker, so they Zeuxis was the second person in the team, and now that Baker's gone, they're trying to move her up to replace that spot. And I think they've always Zeuxis is someone who came out of the system, went away from the promotion for a few years, came back, and it's like they want to give one of their own a big win on the big show against an outsider.
So this is a title change, right?
I would be shocked if Willow was still champion. It's the only reason I don't think the only exception I give is that October is CML's match month where they do a ton of women's matches. So, like, in theory, Willow could get one defense and then come back in the month and do a main event where she loses the title. But I just don't see the purpose of it.
All right, so a little caveat there possibly. But so all that controversy going into All Out, where first they announced it was a CMLL women's title match, then they mysteriously said it wasn't. And a lot of people were speculating, all right, well, maybe CMLL doesn't want their title attached to some, violent Chicago street fight. And you kind of shit on that when I asked you if that may have been the reason. And as it turns out, it was probably just simply because there was a booking change and they decided Statlander needed to win the match, right? I mean, you don't put any weight into the idea that CMLL stepped in and said, now hold on a second. The sanctity of our CMLL women's title is at stake here if you're doing it in a Chicago street fight.
No, I don't think they cared that much. I think back when Rocky Romero first came into CMLL in the early 2000s, he ended up with the super lightweight title, and then they stopped looking for a while. And he did a bunch of changes in California just on indie shows, and no one really cared. So I don't think they really care about what happens to their belts when they're not in there or what kind of matches is defended in. I think they just want, in this case, they had plans and they have to communicate to AEW properly.
Yeah. I think now that we saw how it all played out, I think that's exactly what the scenario was. But it did make for a interesting 2 or 3 days as everybody whipped it up into a somewhat major controversy. Mascara Dorada and Teton. Now this is the tournament final, right?
Yeah, this is the Copa Independencia final. They've run these the last 3 years, and they're basically they're for a giant trophy, like all the CMLL tournaments are for a giant trophy. But the idea is that if you get to the finals of this tournament, you ensure yourself a place on the anniversary. And so it's most of the people in the tournament actually did not make the anniversary. I think a couple of them add to the first couple matches. But for Dorada and Teton to win those tournaments, which were both really strong matches, and then get to have face each other, gives them a big spotlight.
Yeah, and this has a chance to be the best match on the show, right?
Yeah, I think because it's like a first half of the card match, time may be an issue. They had like what I considered the best match in CMLL last year, around this time, and they got 20 minutes to do their story then. And I don't know if they'll get 20 minutes on a 7-match card, but even 12, 15 minutes, these guys are really have great chemistry with each other. Teton's one of the best guys in this promotion. Dorada, when he's on, he's as spectacular as anyone. So like this has the potential easily of being the best match. I think there'll be obviously more emotions in the last couple matches, but like if you're coming in cold, you might walk away with saying this is the best match.
Yeah, I guess it depends what kind of heat and emotion the four-way gets. And I guess it depends. Look, Chris Jericho is 53, 54 years old. So I guess it depends what kind of chemistry he has with Mystico. But that match doesn't necessarily have to be some Ric Flair, Ricky Steamboat classic to be a great match if Arena Mexico elevates it. So I agree with you. I think it depends on how much time Mascara Dorada and Teton get and then what they do with that time, right? So I think that would determine, because if they all had equal time, that would be my betting favorite for the quote unquote match of the night, but we'll see how much time it gets. And then we've got the Team Mexico and the international team trio with Atlantis Jr., Ultimo Guerrero, and Valador Jr. against Satoshi Kojima, Orange Cassidy, and Rocky Romero. Rocky Romero, of course, arguably, not even arguably, one of the biggest heels or rudos in the world, especially in that building. Orange Cassidy, I think, is going to fit like a glove, and he's going to be able to work that style with no problems whatsoever. I think his act will get over. And then you have Satoshi Kojima, pal of Okumura, who is finding his way onto an anniversary show as he bounces around the world, working everywhere from MLW to CMLL to everywhere in between. So size this one up for everybody.
Yeah, the gimmick here is that this is CML having an all-star CMLL team facing an all-star team of all the promotions that they work with that they could squeeze in. So you have Orange representing AEW, and Ring of Honor, Rocky Romero representing New Japan Strong, and Kojima representing New Japan. They couldn't find a way to get Rev Pro in there, but maybe next year.
No ML Dub for Kojima.
Oh, Kojima. Oh yeah, Kojima MLW. That's one I forgot. They have it like they now have like the rotating ad display has the MLW logo up there. So
Yeah,
they were respecting.
This is an MLW podcast, sir.
Yeah.
So very disrespectful.
Yeah. I'm often disrespectful to MLW, so I'll apologize for that.
It's the world champ.
Yeah, that last show, that New York show, that was a show. I lost my train of thought here. I'm just so excited about MLW. I can't think about anything.
You're so excited about Mystico winning the Opera Cup that you just lost focus. You just lost focus.
Do you think Mystico is going to overlook this anniversary show, given that he has the Opera Cup the next day? I mean,
that's right. He might lose his grip against Jericho thinking about bad dude Tito and the Opera Cup. That's right.
Yeah. I mean, it's a prestigious 90. I think it's even older than CML that tournament. So you have to weigh you have to pace yourself, and just Jericho might not be top importance to him when he has the Opera Cup on the line. I would like to see Orange. I've gone to a lot of AEW shows lately, as people on Twitter might have noticed, and I've seen a lot of Orange Cassidy. And one thing that struck me is that Orange Cassidy, he will do a couple of the things he used to do in 2019 and 2020. But mostly he's just like a fiery baby face. And I would like to see Orange Cassidy lean heavily into his gimmick just to see how it would get over with the CMLL fans and how it would get over with the wrestlers. How is Ultimo Guerrero going to react if he starts lightly kicking him in the shins? Is he just going to make faces? Is he just going to be wander around confused? That's really what I want to get out of this match. Is Orange Cassidy just confusing the CML technicals who have never seen anything like it.
Yeah, maybe he'll slowly raise the roof, that would confuse him even more.
Yes, it's just there's lots of possibilities there if they lean into it.
Yeah. So overall, when you look at the card, I look at this card and there's not a single match that I'm not interested in. I think I have some interest in everything here. There's obviously the matches with the stakes on the back end. There's the wackiness of the match we just talked about. Mascara Dorada Titan could be just a tremendous wrestling match. And there's the women's title match. And then I think the two openers have a lot of those young stars that I have some interest in and that I've been following since they've started working Arena Mexico. Guys like Futuro and Neon that we talked about. Star Jr., and you have the star power of Templario and Soberano Jr. So, and I love the Magnus and Ruido team. I might be their biggest fans. I mean, I talk these guys up and everyone else is like, they're all right. I mean, calm down, Lance. I'll pump the brakes. But for whatever reason, I don't know. I'm into those guys. So to me, this is a 7-match card where I have something to sink my teeth into every step of the way. When you look at this card, what do you see?
Wait, first, did you see the Magnus and Rugido tag team title match with Kojima and Okamura?
I didn't see that yet. No,
that's a match that's worth going out and seeing if you like that team. I think that's probably Kojima's best work in Mexico so far.
Not only that, it's booked for me. That's
yes.
It's my favorite wrestler of all time with one of my favorite tag teams in the business right now. So yeah, I mean, I have been woefully behind on CMLL all year, constantly playing catch up. So it's going to be binge watch city for me over the next 48 hours or so. But no, I haven't seen that yet.
Okay. I did. If anyone else is trying to grab some matches to watch, I didn't pick the best matches, but I did do a post of matches involving all these people who are wrestling on the show. One of my, I think all the matches on the show are good and many of them would be great. I am a little disappointed that there's not a for sure excellent match on the show. Dorada Titan could be, but I'm concerned about that they won't get the opportunity at the time. And I would wish for an anniversary where we have a stronger 1 versus 1 or one team versus one team build, rather than anytime we do these multi-man ones, it's CML doesn't really hit them fully on. But I think it's an anniversary show. It's a hot arena in Mexico. It's going to elevate all these matches even stronger than they look on paper. So I am very excited in the show. I don't know if it'll reach the best anniversary shows, but I think it will be easily worth the time and money to watch this.
Yeah, I don't know if it has the one, because you got some of these anniversary shows. I mean, I just rewatched that Blue Panther versus Viano 5 mask versus mask match from whichever anniversary show that was. Which one was that? That was
75.
75. And I mean, you're not going to have anything that has, I don't think the heat and the drama of that match, because it's like you said, these 4 mid-card guys, I don't think there's going to be that emotional attachment. But, I think that match will have good heat because people get into a mask match no matter who's involved. But, when you have matches at mask matches of that level on the history of these shows, I don't think there's anything on this show that's going to be able to match that. So, yeah, in terms of it winding up being one of the greatest anniversary shows ever, I think I would temper expectations there. But what I'm looking at is just a solid card 1 through 7. There's usually a match or two where I'm like, I could live without that. You know what I mean? This one, I have some interest in everything that they're doing.
Yeah, I feel the same way. Every match, there's no sneakers, there's no okay matches. Everything should be good. Everything should get some good energy from the crowd. I think it's a solid line of 1 through 7.
So I want to. This is off the beaten path, but just because we just brought it up, that mask match between Viano 5 and Blue Panther, I saw you mention that there's some lore behind that match in Mexico where Viano 5 and Viano 4 used to pull the old switcheroo as part of their act. And in fact, they did that a few times in WCW, like WCW Pro versus the Armstrongs and things like that, where they would, do the switcheroo behind the referee's back, sort of like the Killer Bees used to do in the 80s when they would put on the masks and do the mask confusion gimmick. So I saw you tweeting about this, but is it true that to this day, there's lore in Mexico that, because in that match, Viano 5, he hits his head on the tope and the blood is just coming through the mask. And he goes to the back in between falls to get checked on. And there's this idea that he pulled the switcheroo with his brother, and his brother, who then would have been fresh and not beaten up from the first couple falls of the match, was the one that actually beat Blue Panther for his mask. Now, we know that that's not true, but it's sort of like that old Ultimate Warrior urban legend where the original Ultimate Warrior died, and it was actually Kerry Von Erich who came running out at WrestleMania 8 or whatever it was. Was it WrestleMania 7 or WrestleMania 8? The Hulk Hogan Sid Justice WrestleMania. I can't remember which one that was. But it's kind of like that became an urban legend in America, and it sounds like this is something in a similar vein.
I would even say it's stronger than that because it became passed along because Mystico, who was Blue Panther's second in that match, started doing like interviews and promos accusing the Blondos of pulling that switch.
Oh, so they weaved it into kayfabe.
Yes, they did. So even though it obviously did not happen, and everyone involved says it did not happen, Mystico, in trying to rationalize why the legend Blue Panther lost his mask, came up with this reason that they had to pull the switch.
Yeah. In the pantheon of upsets, if you had to put a 1 to 10, 1 being an obvious finish, 10 being the biggest upset you can think of, where would that finish have ranked?
That's a 10. I mean, I was looking back at the stuff I wrote around that time, and it was given that Panther was going to win. It was absurd to even consider that there was another outcome coming because Viano 5 was so close to the end of his career, and Blue Panther was one of the great legends of CMLL, who's not. If he was ever going to lose, it wasn't going to be some guy who was at the end of his career. It was going to be some young guy who was putting over at that time. So it was completely a 10. And if you see the footage of the original broadcast of everyone freaking out about it, you could tell that all the people there thought it was a 10 too.
Oh my God, the pop. And the pop is a 10 pop. I mean, it's an incredible reaction. But yeah, you're right. No one was expecting that. Every now and then you have to do that though. You got to keep people on their toes, and it ended up becoming a legendary moment. I mean, there's no doubt about it. So it's in death sometimes. I mean, it's horrible that this man died. And, I don't want to do the Stephen A. Smith's tweet meme, but the fact that he did pass away, I feel like at least with our audience, and I think hopefully with a lot of other people, it exposed a lot of people to that match. Because the first thing I thought of was, okay, we have to talk about that Viano 5 versus Blue Panther mask match. We got to talk about it on the show. We got to tell people in the Discord or whatever that this is because to me, if you consider yourself a hardcore fan of pro wrestling and a student of the game or any of those things, a super nerd when it comes to wrestling, that's one of the must-see matches. That's a match that you have to watch that match. So in the unfortunate event of this man's passing, it was an opportunity to expose that match to a lot of people who hadn't seen it before. I mean, that's an all-time legendary mask match, right?
Yeah, it was. I think Lucha Libre history does not get as celebrated as much, especially in details, as other styles of wrestling. I think CMLL itself even struggles to do that. But so it's sad that it takes a death for people to go back and talk about that match again. But it's a match that it's definitely worthwhile for everyone to go back and take a look at that one and get a feel for like what, because of the finish, became a legendary match, but was like, if for some reason it was like a 50-50 match all along, I think that still would have been a spectacular match but the finish, the surprise of it added a lot to it.
Yeah. And I think if you're a listener of this show, that means you're pretty deep in the weeds in terms of being a hardcore wrestling nerd. And to me, that's one of the Pantheon must-watch matches, especially if you're just narrowing it down to Lucha. But I think on an entire scope of pro wrestling, if you're the type of fan who's going to listen to like the Flagship podcast, you're probably the type of fan who needs to watch that match. So I tried to push that on everybody last week or the week before, whatever it was, when we kind of did his obit. Let's bounce around a couple other topics if you've got a couple more minutes. I'm not going to keep you much longer. A AAA. You had a exactly. You had a crisis of conscience after that third Triple Mania show. I read your kind of, I don't even want to call it review, kind of like your postscript of the three Triple Manias this year. And man, it's like that promotion has sent you on a spiral. It's like you are deeply considering just hand waving it, but I feel like it's almost all right. So Rich and I struggle with this with WWE because very clearly we do not enjoy it. Okay. But the thing with WWE is they're the biggest promotion in the world. They are hot, and we have, we feel like we have to continue to cover it because it would be preposterous to not cover World Wrestling Entertainment. Right. And I feel like it's kind of a similar boat that you're in, where it's like, obviously you hate this promotion. It stinks. There's like no redeeming qualities that come out of it. The shows are just aggressively worse each time somehow, but you almost feel obligated to keep going because if not you, then who, right?
It's that, like, I don't know how many readers I have or how many people listening now who were reading my blog in its earliest days, but like for the first few years, I only covered CMLL because I was just a new Lucha Libre fan. It was like totally overwhelming to see 100 new different people and have no idea what's going on. So in my mind, I just kind of cut it down. I might have not liked the AAA at the time either, but I still, even if I liked the AAA, it was just going to be a lot. But over time, what I realized is that, like, even if I was not paying attention to AAA has some gravity, not in like the actual wrestler. They do not have him. They do not have anything that seems to be anchoring them to the earth like Isaac Newton proposed. But what they do is they do have like a force on the other promotions in Mexico. They do have an effect on CML, even if like they're not like, if they're completely ignoring each other, there's still going to be things that happen in CML because something happened in AAA. There are going to be people leaving CML because they think they've been promised some great opportunity in AAA. AAA right now is saying that there's two women from CML who's talked about jumping to our promotion. And so it's like, you can't cover one promotion without really needing to keep in touch and know what's going on and covering the other promotion and having a greater sphere of all Mexican wrestling and see how they all interact with each other. It's like, you can't cover the rest of the wrestling world without covering WWE to some extent, because WWE has effect on every other promotion, even if they're not working with WWE. Like, I can't completely ignore AAA. I can try to pay a lot less attention to AAA or just try to be less invested in AAA, but it's tough to. It'd be a big hole, and it'd be like missing a big factor in what's going on if I didn't pay attention to what AAA was doing.
No, I totally relate to that. I mean, I feel like you're correct in that assessment. You can't totally hand wave it and not cover it just because it's really, really bad, because it's still an important promotion. I mean, forget just in Mexico, where it would at worst be the number 2 in the pecking order, obviously, but even worldwide, it's still a top 10 promotion, regardless of how bad the shows are in terms of, I mean, because, you know, let's be fair. I mean, let's talk about the business. This Vampiro never-ending retirement tour is actually drawing, right?
Yeah, it has slowed down a little bit, and I wonder if it's going to slow down more, because he did what people perceived was a retirement stipulation on Mexico City, so they're going to be confused why he's still wrestling. But it has drawn pretty well this year, and they keep on running the shows because they believe it'll draw. So that's a fact. That's a big business factor in why people use to work with different promotions or try to run it off.
Yeah. So, I mean, I actually saw you make sort of a down card argument for him to be maybe wrestler of the year based on his drawing ability, which, I mean, sounds preposterous when you look at his matches and his match quality. But look, they're probably going to milk that thing until, like you said, until people finally understand what's happening and have had enough and give up on it, because why wouldn't you?
Yeah. The one funny thing is it's very clear that, like, Conan and Dorian and everyone in AAA management is like, they would really be happy to be out of the Vampiro business, but Vampiro's selling too much tickets that they can't actually find their way out of the Vampiro business. Because they very noticeably kept them far away from the big super ring at the end, because they don't want him involved long term in it. But they still are promoting Vampiro shows because that's what's actually making the money.
Right. Do you get the sense that, because we've talked about this before, and there are differences between the CMLL and AAA fan bases. You've kind of compared it to American wrestling in that, you know, maybe AAA fans are more similar to WWE fans in that, you know, they like the wackier, more, for lack of a better term, sports entertainment and hardcore match style presentation that AAA gives you. And maybe they don't necessarily care about Lucha Libre as a whole, whereas the CMLL fan is more into traditional Lucha Libre and the history, and more of a hardcore fan, more likely to maybe check out an indie show or know what's going on outside of the promotion that they prefer. So do you get the sense that for the AAA, the dyed-in-the-wool AAA fan, which shockingly those exist, do they see these massive warts in the booking and the shows, or are they just there for a party? Like, what take us inside the brain of the people who are buying tickets to these really bad AAA shows?
I think the party aspect is part of it. It's like, especially for that Triple Mania Mexico City show, they feel like this is a one-time AAA comes to Mexico City for a really huge show. So we go once a year, we have a bunch of fun. We don't pay attention to the promotion the rest of the year. And then, so it doesn't really matter what they're doing. We just want to have a good night out. And I think there's another section who are just like, these wrestlers are my specific favorite wrestlers. As long as they're on their show, I don't really even care what they're doing, but I want to just keep on supporting these wrestlers. But I don't think anyone's really, I don't think CML or AAA running that eye angle really thought that people thought, wow, this is really cool, really doing it. Like, most of them were like, oh, this is just whatever Lay's crazy idea they're doing. That's kind of funny. They're not even really invested in seeing what's going. They just kind of treat it as some sort of trash TV show that they turn on, but they don't really, they watch, but they don't think about all that much.
Right. So when another difference, and correct me if I'm wrong, would be where when CMLL, for instance, brings in these AEW stars to Arena Mexico, whether it's Bryan Danielson, the Black Blue Combat Club, MJF, Chris Jericho, right? You go on and on. It legitimately helps pop the house. And my interpretation of that is, oh, these people, they love pro wrestling. And while they might not necessarily be watching AEW Dynamite on some illegal stream somewhere, they're aware of who Bryan Danielson is. And they're like, wow, a huge pro wrestling star is coming to Arena Mexico. I can't miss this, right? Whereas you often note when you talk about AAA, Conan will book some of these people, and you don't get the sense that these fans have any idea who some of these foreigners are that Conan is bringing in, and he's putting them in prominent spots. Is that just another difference between the fan bases?
I think that's part of the difference. I think AAA fans just know the AAA wrestlers, and that's all the time they're going to really spend on wrestling beyond on their interest in wrestling. There are some that know more than that, but I would say the majority are just focused on their favorites, and as long as their favorites are wrestling, they're okay. I think there's CML fans know a little bit more, especially those top names, and the difference is that CML is getting the Bryan Danielsons and AAA is getting the ex-Jinder Mahals, and there's a big wave off there. But It's not like when Mansoor came into CML that he was a big deal to those fans. It was like they know the top guys, they don't know and they know the guys who have like a lot of WWE exposure from the time WWE has been on in Mexico, but they're not as deep. And then the other factor is like there are AAA fans, there are CML fans, and then there's a group of indie fans who follow just indie wrestling and also seem like they have a more knowledgeable about international wrestling than the guys who just follow the promotions. And those fans are more willing to come to Arena Mexico when a big name comes in. Sometimes that annoys the CMLL fans, like when Death Triangle came in a couple months ago. Mm-hmm. They got Arena Mexico was flooded by indie fans who do not normally show up.
So all the Mexican smarks showed up, is what you're saying.
Basically, and they all rooted for the Death Triangle guys, and they booed Mystico because they're not CML fans; they are indie fans. Right. And so the CML fans are very upset that their building got overtaken by the away team. And so they are more willing to show up to Arena Mexico when they put on those big names, because I think they also, like, they might not like CML as much, but they know that, like, if they bring in a big outside name, that big outside name is going to actually get to do a really good match, as opposed to AAA, where they could just be doing junk, or someone else could be, or it could be just some big angle or something that'll be less satisfying.
Okay, so even the smarks in Mexico recognize that AAA is pretty bad.
Yeah, I think there are people in AAA that they approve of because they've come up through the indies, but they mostly understand that this is not wrestling that they are going to have any interest in.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. I think it's sometimes maybe American fans don't realize that there's smarks everywhere. There's smarks in Mexico. You know, anyone will tell you that, you know, in Japan, Korakuen Hall tends to have a smarkier crowd, you know, fans that are more fans of multiple promotions as opposed to maybe just a singular promotion that's in the building that night. And sometimes I think maybe American fans don't understand that that's sort of, for lack of a better term, smark culture or deep insider culture. It exists everywhere, anywhere that there's wrestling fans. I didn't warn you that I was going to have AAA questions when we did this because I was afraid that you would say that you were busy washing your hair or something. So I had to trick you. I had to fool you with trickery to come on this show to talk about the CMLL Anniversary show, to which you quickly answered yes, and then sneak in the AAA questions. That was very devious of me.
Yeah, that's a big trick. Yeah, I noticed I did not get. At least it was nice that I did not get too much asked to explain AAA after Triple Mania, but I knew those questions were coming at some point.
Yeah. So I had to use a little trickery there, and I had to use some psychology because, you know, you would have either left me on you would have left my DM on red, or you would have made up some hokey excuse and said the Cubs were in extra innings or something, and you would have blew me off. So I had to get you on somehow to answer some AAA questions at the end. But anyway. This was great. It was extremely informative, as always, and thank you so much for coming on.
Sure. Thanks for having me.
Hey, guys, this is Rich, obviously co-host of the Flagship Podcast here on the Voice Wrestling Podcast Network. We'll get right back to the Flagship. Before we do that, though, I do want to let you know that this particular episode of the Flagship Podcast is sponsored by our friends XBet. If you are passionate about sports and looking for a thrill, you need to check out the freshly redesigned XBet. They're calling it the last sportsbook you'll ever join. I've been playing on XBet, and they really do have it all, whether it's odds on basketball, combat sports, or even betting on the next Bitcoin dip. And the best part is, when you win, you get paid quick. But it's not just about placing bets. No. XBet is a whole experience. They support athletes and sports shows like ours, and they give back to the community with tons of free bets and cash prize contests. Did I mention they also have a casino now? Yes, you can spin the slots, play some roulette, or try your luck at the live tables, all from a mobile platform that lets you enjoy the fun on the go. Whether you're super into sports betting or just curious about trying it out, you need a site that makes it fun and easy, and that's why you've got to check out XBet. Sign up today using promo code VOW and get a generous bonus of up to $1,000 on your first deposit. Again, that's promo code VOW at XBet. X as in, DMX bet. And use that promo code VOW for a free cash bonus to kickstart your betting journey. There's great UFC cards on the horizon. Baseball season's in full swing. Football's just about to come. There's never been a better time to play. Again, go to XBet. Use that promo code VOW. Get a generous bonus of up to $1,000 off your first deposit. Promo code VOW. Sign up today at xbet.ag. Make your next bet XBet. And now, back to the flagship.
Growing your business can mean big-time logistical questions, like how are we going to keep up with all these local deliveries? Let Uber Direct offer you a helping hand. With Uber Direct, you take orders on your website, app, or by phone. Then, drivers who are part of Uber's courier network pick them up from your store and deliver them to your customer's doorstep. Sounds simple, right? Delivery just got better with Uber Direct. Learn more at uberdirect.com.
All right, we're going to bring Case Lowe in a bit to talk some Dragongate and close the show. But first, very quickly, I want to get in some MLW talk because, of course, this is now an MLW podcast. We reviewed Summer of the Beasts last week or the week before, I can't remember. But we thought it was curious that, unlike the pattern that MLW had been following really since December of 2023, where basically they do what were pay-per-view shows over the first half of 2024 on Triller. And then on the night of those pay-per-view shows, they would also tape an additional show, which would then air on YouTube a couple of weeks later. So basically they've had 2 shows per month, each month since last December. And that's sort of been their taping pattern, where you would get the pay-per-view on Triller, right? And then the YouTube special a couple of months later. Now, over the course of the year, they stopped airing their pay-per-views on Triller. So what these have turned into are basically 2 YouTube specials per month, as opposed to a pay-per-view and a YouTube special, right? And that's been the pattern all the way through. They did it in Philly at the beginning of the year. They did it in New York for Once Upon a Time in New York and Intimidation Games. And then the War Chamber show that got split into 2 from St. Petersburg. And then Azteca Lucha and Fury Road from Cicero. That's the show that Rich attended live. And then Atlanta at Center Stage with Battle Riot and the Anniversary show. St. Petersburg for Blood and Thunder and Never Say Never. And then New York, we get back to New York for Summer of the Beast at Melrose Ballroom. And for whatever reason, they didn't announce a second YouTube special for that show on August 29th. It was just Summer of the Beast. Then the show happens and we review it and we see that there's a number of dark matches that weren't used for Summer of the Beast. And, you kind of put 2 and 2 together and you figure, all right, well, maybe they're saving those matches for the second YouTube special of the month, even though it's not announced, because it's kind of weird that they're not going to have the second show, even though they have all of these extra matches, right? So a few days after Summer of the Beast aired, the news broke, and I think it may have been Fightful. If it was somebody else, I apologize. That there would, in fact, be a second YouTube special coming out of those Melrose tapings. And that's what aired last Saturday. It was MLW Summer of the Beast part 2 with sort of the leftover matches from that taping that didn't air on MLW Summer of the Beast, which, by the way, went 2 hours and 45 minutes as opposed to the usual 2 hours you're in and you're out. So Summer of the Beast was a little longer than usual. Maybe, I have one of two ideas here. One is maybe they intended Summer of the Beast to just be one YouTube special, but it ran a little too long for their liking, so they decided to chop off a couple of the matches and split them off into something separate. Or number two, they didn't. Or number two, they are trying a new marketing strategy in that maybe if we don't announce both shows ahead of time and we leak to the media that we're going to do a surprise second YouTube show a week later, that'll drum up more interest in it, and it'll get more eyeballs on it and bring more awareness to it. So I think it was one of those two options. I'm going to guess that it was the former and not the latter. I think maybe the intent was to do one show this time around and it ran a little long, and they cut some stuff that maybe they thought wasn't super important into leading into the next show. But then realized, hey, you know what? We can create another little mini YouTube special out of this, because this second show, Summer of the Beast 2, only ran about 40 to 45 minutes. So you would think if the plan all along was to do two specials as usual, you would have had them, you would have tried to get the first one to be 2 hours like normal, and maybe do the second one, a little shorter, which has kind of been the pattern. But in this case, one was longer than usual and one was a little shorter. So the whole thing was just a little bizarre and didn't follow the pattern that they had been following over the course of the year for whatever reason. Okay. We could ask, but they don't seem to want to really communicate with us, despite the fact that, they send us invites, press invites to cover the shows and all those things. And we are in communication with their PR team, but they never really have answers, or they never even bother answering us, even with non-answers when we have questions for them. So at this point, we're not even going to bother anymore. But at any rate, we had this Summer of the Beast 2, short little, 40-minute show with the remaining matches from Summer of the Beast. And it wasn't very good, but, there were some minor takeaways from it. We had Delmi Exo versus Miyu Yamashita, and, it just wasn't any good. They only went about 5-6 minutes. It wasn't enough time for me to really get a good feel for Yamashita. This is just the way MLW books. They'll bring in these Joshi or some of these, names from Japan, and if they're coming in for one-offs, they put someone over, and that's really the traditional way to do business. But the effort's not always super good. And I guess if you're Miyu Yamashita and you're told you're doing a 5-minute job to the house champion, the top star in the division in-house, how much effort are you really going to put in? To you, it's just, another booking along the way. Yamashita had been in the United States anyway. Let me double confirm that at the time of the taping. Because she was booked for Game Changer Wrestling a couple of days later in Chicago before going back to Japan. So I guess MLW took the opportunity, knowing she would be here, because she works Game Changer Wrestling pretty regularly. So knowing she was coming in for another Game Changer Wrestling shot, they booked her, and they put Delmi Exo over her, and there wasn't much of a match, and I don't think much of Delmi Exo, and that's that. Mads Krugar, as they've kind of combined his indie name with his traditional MLW gimmick. He had a match against Mr. Thomas, and this made no sense because Mads Krugar is getting the next title shot against Satoshi Kojima, and I figure he's going to win this Kojima thing. I don't know how much longer before they stop bringing Kojima over, but he's had the title for quite some time, and they seem to be rebuilding things around Contra. So I think Kruger's going to win that match. But whether Kruger beats Kojima or not, I don't understand needing to not beating Mr. Thomas, who never wins, by the way. Mr. Thomas is Alex Kane's heavy, I guess. It's the former Blaster McMassive Thomas Sharp. Okay. He's also, oddly enough, been part of Contra in the past as part of the Sentai Death Squad. But he's been aligned with Alex Kane in the Bumaye Fight Club, and he's basically Alex Kane's pin eater, and he never wins. So I figured this would be just Mads Krugar winning what was essentially an extended squash over a physically impressive looking wrestler, right? That's kind of what I figured this would be, because you look at Mr. Thomas. He lost to AJ Francis back in February when AJ Francis was feuding with Alex Kane, right? So it was AJ Francis beating Alex Kane's stablemate. He challenged for the tag team titles in March with Alex Kane, challenging Davey Boy Smith Jr. and Tom Lawlor. They lost, and Mr. Thomas took the pin. He was one of the many people in the Battle Riot. And then he lost to Alex Kane in the Opera Cup. This guy literally never wins. We never see this guy win a match. The last time we saw Mr. Thomas win a match, you got to go all the way back to October of 2023 when he teamed with O'Shea Edwards, who hasn't been used in MLW all year, and they beat the main event, the Jay Lion Midas Black version of the main event, on an MLW Fusion, which they don't even really have anymore, back in October of 2023. The last time he won a singles match, you got to go all the way back to July of 2023 when he won a squash over Jay Bougie on a Fusion. So, this is just a guy that we never see win. It's been established that he never wins. And you have the guy challenging for the world title on the next set of tapings. And there has to be all kinds of shenanigans in order for Kruger to win. I don't get it. We had Alex Kane come out and beat up the Sentai Death Squad that was at ringside to even up the odds. Okay. But then we had all kinds of stuff going on behind the ref's back, and it was presented as Kruger stealing a win from Mr. Thomas. You don't need to do that against Mr. Thomas. He could just beat him. If it would have been against Alex Kane, okay, I get it. That's a guy who they push. He's a former world champion. Mr. Thomas? Why can't Mads Kruger just beat that guy? Anyway, that didn't make any sense. And then the main event here was Bobby Fish versus Timothy Thatcher with Brett Ryan Gosselin on the commentary. So, look, this was the best match on the show. This was exactly what you would expect out of Fish and Thatcher. Good grappling, good, solid professional wrestling. Fish hit Thatcher with an accidental low blow, and the referee chastised him and all that. They put it over on commentary. But then there was a spot a couple of minutes later where Thatcher was really laying into Fish. He had him up against the ropes. The referee was trying to break him up. Thatcher kind of shoves the referee, not in a malicious way, but in more of a, not in a malicious heel way, but more of a, he's having his way with the guy and he's kind of lost control of his emotions. He didn't mean to shove the ref, so he shoves the referee. The referee goes flying into the corner, and while the referee is selling the bump into the corner, Fish kicks Thatcher in the balls and then rolls him up and pins him. This time the kick 100% on purpose as the heel Bobby Fish steals a win from Timothy Thatcher. So, when they booked this match, I thought it was just going to be a win for Thatcher because Fish had come in and it looked like he was being used by Court as sort of just a veteran, good hand job guy to put other people over. But on this taping, they obviously shot the big angle later in the night where Fish and Gosselin, who had gotten together at the last taping, after that segment with, who was it? The Christ, right? After Brett Ryan Gosling beat the Christ brother, whichever one is not canceled. I think it's Jake. Maybe it's Dave. I don't know. One of the Christ brother who's not canceled. And they did the post-match beatdown and they aligned Fish with Gosselin. So they come back on this taping and, Gosselin, reaffirms his partnership with Fish after this match, puts him over on the commentary with the heel finish and everything. And then later on in the taping, obviously, on the first Summer of the Beast, which we covered last week, they do the big angle with the Andersons, and it appears as though those four are now aligned. You could tell that this was taped before that big angle, though, because when Fish and Gosselin were up on the stage, hamming it up after the match, the Andersons weren't a part of that, right? Because that angle would be shot later. So anyway, that's how you can tell the continuity of these things and whatnot. But that was it. That was Summer of the Beast 2. There really wasn't much to it. I don't understand not putting Mads Kruger over super strong before he heads into a title match. And, the Bobby Fish, Brett Ryan Gosselin, Andersons thing, the Boar Horseman thing, I'm interested in it. I don't know. It's a cute little gimmick that they're doing with those guys. And Del Miexo continues to be thoroughly unimpressive. All right, so Fightland in center stage. That's where we've got Satoshi Kojima versus Mads Kruger for the title. We've got the Opera Cup semifinals and finals. So Mystico versus Bad Dude Tito and TJP versus Kenta. And then the final, the Andersons against the Bumaye Fight Club, Alex Kane and Mr. Thomas. And I assure you that Mr. Thomas will be taking the pin there again. Timothy Thatcher versus Donovan Dijak. Remember, Dijak was introduced on Summer of the Beast as the latest member of the World Titan Federation. And Okamura, we thought he had been written off. Oh no, he will take on Adam Priest. So hopefully Adam Priest gets a big win there. Remember, this is in Atlanta, so Adam Priest is local. They're going to use him. I'm not confident he's going to win because they could just be a deal where they're using them because they're in Atlanta and they don't plan to bring him up north. I think the next set after Atlanta is, it's St. Petersburg in October for Slaughterhouse. Maybe they will use Priest in St. Petersburg as well. So maybe he will beat Okamura. But then the TV taping side of things, as we get back on the regular double taping schedule, no surprise shows or anything like that. This is an announced television taping in center stage on the 14th of the night of Fightland. And on the TV taping side is a Barrio Brawl with Jesus Rodriguez and Matthew Justice. Janai Kai defending the featherweight title against Del Miexo. I think I screwed up before. Exo is not the champion, of course. Janai Kai is. I should have known that. I screwed that up. Taipei Deathmatch, Akira versus Akira Kwan. You know Akira is all fired up to do a Taipei Deathmatch with Akira Kwan. So Akira's battle with Contra rages on. A Val Tudo rules match with Matt Riddle and Tom Lawlor. So we'll see what that looks like. It sounds interesting. The Andersons are facing mystery opponents. So maybe they're shooting some kind of angle in the match against Alex Kane and Mr. Thomas. I don't know, but it's listed as the Andersons versus somebody. And then Bobby Fish versus Kevin Knight. That looks like an interesting match. Kevin Knight, good young prospect. Bobby Fish currently getting a push as part of the Boar Horsemen. And then they go on October 4th, as noted, to St. Petersburg for Slaughterhouse. And the only thing we know of there is Contra Unit, Akira Kwan and Minoru Suzuki. Remember, they beat Kojima and Nakamura for those tag team titles, and they'll have their first defense in St. Petersburg against Alex Kane and Mr. Thomas. Does that mean Alex Kane and Mr. Thomas might upset the Andersons in Atlanta? It could. It might not. With MLW, you never know. But I guess we'll find out this weekend at MLW Fightland. All right, so that gets you all caught up on MLW, and we're going to bring in Case Lowe and talk about some Dragongate. All right, we're going to bring in the young boy, Case Lowe. And, I don't know. It's like I said at the top, it might be time to stop referring to him as the young boy. I've been calling him that for like a decade now. He's like 47 years old at this point, and we're still calling him the young boy. But I have to, I gotta bury you, Case, because I have to say you've been a mutual friend of ours has buried you today, and I was sent a very interesting screenshot of a conversation you were having with this mutual friend of ours, and maybe the young boy nickname has to go not only because you're not so young anymore, but because, man, I didn't know we were dealing with Grandpa Case Lowe here. Here's the screenshot I was sent by a mutual friend of ours. Here is the statement verbatim that you sent this man, okay, for the audience here. And I quote verbatim. This is what you sent to this mutual friend. Quote, Lanza wants to record pod with me at 9 p.m. What is this, New Year's Eve? End quote.
That is a direct quote.
Case Lowe, you're way too young to be complaining about a 9 p.m. call time for this podcast. What is going on, man?
Can I defend myself and say that I wake up every morning at 3:30 in the morning to go to work?
I mean, but you're still so young and virile.
Oh,
you know?
No, I'm beat up. I am haggard. This life, it's been a long 25 years.
You know, you're out there, you're chasing broads in Chicago. God knows what you're doing.
I live happily with my girlfriend. I am done chasing. I am domesticated. I am tired. I am old.
This is such an old man statement. What is this, New Year's Eve? I have to admit, it did pop me. I did pop for the line.
It is a phrase that I stole from the old man that I was texting, which I'm sure you can hear him saying now that you think about it.
I can hear him in his voice saying that exact phrase. So you're throwing it right back at him. A very reliable source sent that to me today. Now that is an old school reference. If anybody gets that one, I will be very shocked. He'll probably be the only one to get that one. But you're here to talk about, of course, Dragongate. You know, I talked at the top how the undisputed most knowledgeable person on this planet when it comes to Dragongate is Jai Church, of course, right? I mean, nobody would argue that. But Case Lowe, do you think you're number two? Now, listen, Mike Spears is never going to listen to this. Let's be honest. So
you're so right.
Are you? So you don't have to worry about, you know, politically upsetting him or, you know, causing a rift with the Open the Voice. Do you think you're number two? Put the modesty aside. Do you think you're the number two Dragongate expert on this planet Earth? And I'll even give you a little caveat because I want you to get cocky here. Let's just say English speaking. Let's just say English. Are you the number two Dragongate expert on this planet English speaking?
I've been covering Dragongate for your website for 9 years now, and I'm 25 years old. I've been doing it almost half of my life at this point. And while I would defer to our mutual friend Alan Forel as the primary English-speaking expert for all things Japanese wrestling, when it comes to Dragongate specifically, at this point, I would put myself behind Jay. I really am I hate most things I do. I'm really proud of some of the stuff that I've done for Dragongate and for Voices of Wrestling.
Yeah. So you put yourself ahead of Spears. That's
God, yeah. That guy, come on now.
Yeah. You know he's not going to listen to this. So
no, absolutely not. Okay. He doesn't listen to me when I'm talking to him.
No. I pick up that energy sometimes when I listen to the show. Absolutely. No, yeah, but yeah, listen, you can't have a better guest for something like this. And you're going to try to pick me up out of my Dragongate malaise that I've been in.
Oh, God, does it drive me nuts. I listen every week. I think you're the best analyst there is in wrestling. I listen to every bit of audio you do.
You know what? I think you're right.
I know you do. And then the Dragongate section comes about, and I go, what show did Joe watch? What is happening here? We were lockstep for 2.5 hours, and then you parachute into Dangerous Gate, and you shit on it. I go, what happened to my friend Joe? What's going on now? What show is he watching?
This has been a problem for me. I would probably say since the pandemic.
I think a little bit before. I think ever since Shima left, You've struggled just, I think, with the identity of this promotion.
Yeah, I kind of use the pandemic as my timeline marker for everything now, though.
That's fair. That's entirely fair.
Yeah, I just say, since the pandemic, it seems accurate, because the pandemic seems like, it's funny. It seems like it was both 10 minutes ago and 40 years ago, right?
I know, and we're going to hit the 5-year anniversary next year, which is so, that's a lifetime ago.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. Those flagships covering like
2AW
and desperate Big Japan because they couldn't afford to stop running. And
thank goodness Joey Bay's GoFundMe kept them alive. It's a joke for 4 people, but I'm glad I made it.
Listen, it's the third hour, and that's the 4th joke for about a half a dozen people tops. So it's okay, You know how the third hour of this show goes.
Oh, very much so.
You're lucky I'm not breaking down my sex life step by step here. So
I'm very lucky.
The inside jokes for 3 or 4 people definitely are appropriate for the third hour of the show. And I had to stick you in the third hour because it's Dragongate. That's the bit.
Oh, I know. I wasn't leading off the show. I know my place on the totem pole. Come on now.
You should understand the lore and the bit. And Of course, I'm explaining the joke, which is something you're not supposed to do. But that's, the Dragon Gate has to be buried on the third hour. I have half a mind to cut this and put it on an overrun, to be completely honest with you.
It doesn't have to be. It would help my podcast. It would help my business if this show led off with Dragon Gate and more often than not spoke positively about it. It would do me a lot of favor, but it's always in the third hour, and I deal with Grumpy Joe saying, why aren't things the way they used to be?
Yeah, that's the other piece of it too. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that Dragon Gate, hasn't let me down for the last 5 years. It's definitely not your big brother's Dragon Gate, but I do think the other factor is it's usually at the end of like a 3 hour 45-minute show. It's a 11:45. I'm dragging ass. You podcast, so I've been talking so long that I feel like my mouth is moving at 0.75 speed,
absolutely,
and my brain's moving at full speed, and it's not synced up, and I don't even know what I'm saying. It's I'm a teetotaler, and I've never drank before, but I approximate it to what it must feel like to be drunk at that point of a 4-hour podcast. We don't know what the fuck you're saying anymore, and I really just want it to end. Case Lowe. I really just want to hit my easy chair, turn on College Football 25, and try to win that natty with Rutgers University.
I just want a natty with Vanderbilt. I'm happy to confirm VoiceGate listeners that follow me along on this journey. I have rebuilt the bottom feeder of the SEC into a global powerhouse.
Yeah. So that's really all I want to do at that point. And, I'm sitting here trying to break down, a fucking Madoka Kakuta match that half put me to sleep to begin with. And I'm just grumpy. I'm grumpy, Case Lowe. So that definitely has something to do with it. But I'm all full of piss and vinegar right now. Okay. Because spoiler alert, peek behind the curtain. These solo flagships without Captain Craich bouncing around Iceland again for some reason. These solo flagships, I do them in segments over the course of the week. So I'm fresh as a daisy. I just watched the damn Dragon Gate show from Korakuen Hall 10 minutes ago before I got on with you. Okay. And as you can see, I'm full of energy and I'm ready to go. But because I only pop my head in now and then on this promotion, you're definitely going to have to carry this thing.
Gladly. The next 45 minutes of audio are for the people that have either never watched Dragon Gate or watched it a long time ago and are wondering what's going on now. I will take your hand through this show and everything you can expect for the rest of the year.
Yeah, for sure. Because, Rich and I aren't really on top of it. And again, I said this earlier on the show, but that's more my fault than his because he's still into it. He still watches Dragon Gate and enjoys it. The problem is he knows it's fucking horrendous audio because I'm not into it. And in order to be interesting, you have to be interested. That's just a fact if you're doing audio. And he recognizes that it's like, they're shit segments because I'm the shits in those segments. So it's really just the big shows that we're hitting on now. I mean, you remember the old days. We would do Dragon Gate almost every week.
Of course. Absolutely.
But again, this isn't your big brother's Dragon Gate. So let's get into it. I did watch this Korakuen show. And I probably have some unique takeaways because, I'm someone who just parachutes in or whatnot. Here's a good starter for you.
My dander's already up. I have no idea what you're going to say. I'm already tense.
Well, I'm sure listen, just to give you an idea what this is going to be like, I want to start with Punch Tamanaga.
Naturally, that is so on brand for you.
I want to start with Punch Tamanaga because, first of all, this man no longer has the punch perm.
Mm-hmm.
I need an explanation for this. Why? What's going on?
Because he's like 65 years old. That's why he's lucky he has any hair.
But you can't be Punch Tamanaga then. That's the whole bit. That's the joke, right?
Yeah, but I guess the overarching theme is that even though the joke is that he's Punch Tamanaga, the overarching joke is that everybody hates him. And why would they bother changing his name when he's only Punch Tamanaga?
So he's the new whipping boy of the roster, similar to who have some of the past bottom guy whipping boys on the roster been historically in the Dragon system.
There was Problem Dragon for a while, Mondai Ryu.
Yeah.
Obviously Konamami Ichikawa, the former Stalker Ichikawa. There's always a guy that is definitively the worst wrestler on the roster. And Ichikawa's been gone for most of this year. He just wrestled at his homecoming show for the first time all year. And Problem Dragon has a screwed up neck, so he doesn't wrestle a ton anymore. So Punch has become that guy.
Yeah. And he just gets no respect. Totally shit on. He's still working. This guy's like a 15-year veteran. He's working openers. I mean, it's just, it's Punch Tamanaga. And he worked this kid, Daiki Yanagiuchi.
Yes.
If I've seen him, I don't remember seeing him. I don't think I've seen, unless he worked one of the major shows.
Not in any substantial role. So he debuted in the spring of last year. His backstory is that he was a Korakuen Hall employee, like an usher, basically, who would specifically ask to be scheduled on the days of Dragongate show so he could get paid to watch Dragongate, basically, and he saved up enough money to come into the dojo. And he's been on the roster for a year now, but as I'm sure you could tell from this opener, I don't know if you watched the English commentary or the Japanese commentary, but he's been on the roster for a year now, and he doesn't have a win. I think he has a magnificent tope suicida. I've been pushing for him on VoiceGate. I really want them to do something with him, but his thing is that he can't win. He continues to lose.
I watched the Japanese commentary because I couldn't find the English commentary. I'm such a dope.
Okay, next time that happens, send me a DM. I will link you to the English commentary.
Yeah, I mean, I wish I would have watched the English commentary because it's really great because it's incredibly insightful and helpful and would have helped me here. But I've watched enough Japanese. Listen, I've been doing this decades, Case Lowe. I'm picking up what's being laid down here, even with the Japanese commentary. The point on this match, I can't believe we're wasting time on this match, is that this kid got way more offense than I was expecting. But now that you've laid out sort of his arc, it makes sense because he's wrestling without question out of the veterans, the bottom guy on the roster. And I suspect that they were teasing this kid finally getting his first win.
Yes. Yeah. That's been over the last month or so. You feel like he's getting momentum and that he's close. And on English commentary, now they're harping on the fact that he hasn't gotten a win before. And again, he's not new. He debuted in March of last year. And as it becomes evident later on in this show, but even historically with Dragongate, they're not New Japan. They're not Noah. They don't beat their young boys into the ground typically. Normally, you might lose your first 3 or 4 months, but you eventually get something. With Yanagiuchi, it hasn't been the case. I think he's super talented. He's raw, but I really like what he has to work with. So I'm hoping him chastising the referee for not counting fast enough for this match eventually leads to something.
Yeah, let's talk about the other kid, this Homare Kato?
Yeah, Homare Kato.
Okay, so he wrestled Masaki Mochizuki here, and this was this kid's debut match.
Match. Yep.
So this is sort of the current training class. This is the gold standard. This is the kid that they think can be a star. He's according to your notes that you sent me, he is the first one to debut out of this class. And this wasn't a curtain jerker or the second match out of the curtain. This was like third from the top. They positioned this. So my interpretation here, and based on what you've sent me and what I saw in the post-match angle that we'll get to and everything, is they think this is going to be a star and he's going to get rocket packed. So, and his performance in the match, I mean, to me, this is exactly what you want to see out of a match with a kid making his debut that you think has a future, and Masaki Mochizuki, who is the grumpy, how old is he now? 53, 54, whatever he is.
Yeah, I think he's 54.
Yeah, the grumpy 53, 54-year-old veteran who still looks 10 years younger than he is. It's funny because when he was 34, he looked 10 years older than he was, and now he's 54 and looks 10 years younger than he is. Like,
and he threatened to retire 20 years ago. That's like kind of lost. It's lost lore because now he's the Iron Man and he's the guy that keeps going. But he debuted in 1994, and then in 2004, when Dragongate first founded, he was the second Dreamgate champion, and the whole motif of that title run was, okay, he's going to steady the ship after the Torimon split. He's going to be the champion, and once he loses the belt, he's probably going to retire. And then he just never retired, and then he had the 20-year anniversary match with Masato Yoshino at Korakuen Hall, and then this year, it was his 30th anniversary, and he wrestled Shingo at Korakuen Hall, and he just keeps going. And if you didn't know he was 54, you would be clueless because he wrestles like a guy in his mid-30s.
Yeah, he's still pretty great, and I know I'm preaching to the choir with you, but he's undoubtedly one of the greatest wrestlers of his generation that I think has to be considered underrated just based on the fact that he's been in this little corner of the world in Dragongate where even a lot of hardcore wrestling fans haven't seen a good deal of his work because even in super hardcore circles, Dragongate very often gets hand waved and has gotten hand waved over the years. So He's just an incredible, legitimately all-time great wrestler who's still working at a high level. And he was the perfect guy for this style of match where he's beating up this kid in his debut. But the kid is feisty. This was not a squash. And it was just like you put it, a grumpy veteran versus a rookie. And the post-match angle is really the story here because they had, two of the babyface units come out, Gold Class and Big Hug. And they were trying to woo the kid. They're like, hey, listen, you should join our crew,
And not just join. They wanted to both units want to make him the centerpiece of their unit.
Right. They're throwing the full court press at this guy and trying to get him to join. And, the fans are yelling and everything. And then this kid, he tells them no thanks. And he says he wants to join Z-Brats, which is like the top heel unit. Right. And the crowd is oohing and on. And then we start hearing fucking Shun moaning on the microphone and laughing on the microphone, Oh, and the crowd is like, oh, here he comes. And he comes out with Z-Brats. And they're like, all right, we'll take this kid. And then he gets on one knee and poses and takes the pictures. So this little shit, he comes out and debuts against Masaki Mochizuki, has a hell of a match. And, the crowd's like, look at this guy. He's going to be something. And then he tells all the babyface units basically to fuck off, and he joins Z-Brats on his first night.
It's one of those angles, we talked about it on VoiceGate this week, that we'll remember forever. Kato is a guy, and Jay explained this on commentary. So in Dragongate, you have your green boys who are trainees. These are guys that live in the dojo. They pay to be at the dojo. They are your absolute bottom feeders of the system. And then you have a level up of young boys. And these are the guys that you see at ringside a lot. It's always fun to go back and watch old Dragongate matches because you'll go like, oh, that's Shingo at ringside, or that's Tozawa, or that's, whoever. Oh, they're the ringside attendant for this match. And when you're a green boy, you're an unknown. You don't have a name. You're not respected. It's, whatever you think of traditional Japanese wrestling culture, that's what it is. And Jay made the point on commentary. He goes, I've been hearing about Kato since Kobe World 2023, so last July, when he was still a green boy. And that's unheard of for anybody at that level of their training to have any sort of name recognition, let alone hype. So this is something that within the company, they've positioned as a huge deal. I've heard from people that I trust of like, when Kato debuts, it's going to be a giant thing. We didn't know it was going to be this thing, but it ended up being this giant thing. So he has, like you said, it's a traditional veteran versus young boy match where Kato, by the end of it, is not only getting a ton of offense. At one point he throws that he gets slapped around by Mochizuki, and then he throws this super mean super kick at Mochi, and then almost wins with a Frankensteiner. And from that point on, this Korakuen crowd, and it was almost 1,500 there, was the best post-COVID Korakuen crowd they've done, not including the Kness retirement show, which was like a true full-blown sellout, as many people as they could fit in the building. But there was almost 1,500 people here, which is about what they do, but this was a little bit better than what they've been doing. This crowd is on the young boy side. And even Mochi feeds into it because they start chanting his name, and Mochi's telling them, oh, come on, chant his name. And it just becomes this vicious fight. By the end of the match, we feel like we're witnessing, it's tough to say a star being made in the moment because it was literally his first ever match. And Dragongate has, over the last few years, attempted to rocket pack some other guys. And for a variety of reasons, it's gone poorly. And all of the guys that they tried with are no longer in the company. And again, there's a few different scenarios of that, a few different reasons those guys are no longer there. But Kato, nobody saw this coming, where you have Gold Class who, without Coach Minoura, is oddly hotter than ever. And then you have Big Hug, who, for those that don't watch the promotion, that's Hyo and Jackie Kame and Luis Monte. And those are the main figures of Dragongate right now. Nobody is more over on a show-in, show-out basis than Hyo. And they all want him to join this unit. And then it is a beautiful moment for longtime fans of Dragongate. Joe, one of the things you always compliment this promotion on is everything matters, right? You might feud in 2008, and then in 2014, you got a team with this guy, and you're going to side-eye each other the entire match. And for 2.5 years, Shun Skywalker has been like the worst ex-boyfriend you've ever had. He's manipulated everybody on the roster. He's made everybody feel lesser than. He got Jason Lee to turn on his best friend, Jackie Kame, and join him in Z-Brats. He got Coach Minoura to turn on his mini and join Z-Brats. And after all of this time, after all this vicious cycle, he's now inflicted himself on the ace of the new young boy class. He's the first of what will end up being 4 debuts. This is like the honor school kid, the kid that's on honor roll, starting to hang out with the wrong group of kids in high school. Like, they've completely fucked with this kid's head after his debut match. It was such a phenomenal angle.
Yeah, it came across real well too. I went into it unspoiled. I saw the notes you sent me, and I said I want to watch the show first before I read the notes, because I want to have, I don't want to go in with your interpretation of things.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I want to watch the show and I want to come up with my own interpretation, then read what you have to say. And then, and have your details correct, maybe things that I got wrong. But yeah, I was expecting him to just join one of those 2 babyface units, and it was a total twist when, because obviously I couldn't understand what he was saying. I didn't know that he called out and called his own shot and said he wanted to join Z-Brats. I just thought Shun decided to come out and try to recruit the kid too.
No. So the translation was, he says, because Ben K is the one that offers him a spot in Gold Class, and Hyo's the one that offers him a spot in Big Hug. And, he says, Ben, thank you. I appreciate the offer. Hyo, I appreciate the offer. But I actually admire somebody else in Dragongate, and that person is Shun Skywalker. And I don't know if you picked up on this, but they really hammered it home on English that, after Z-Brats come out and they set up a match for the next Korakuen show, that I would assume Homare will be in. Going forward, he'll just be known as his first name, Homare. But he goes like dead behind the eyes. He was like a bright young boy 15 minutes ago, and now he looks like a zombie basically. And it's just it was so chaotic. And even, for somebody like me who watches every show, this was something that caught everybody by surprise.
Yeah, so he's already leaning into some character work now and doing some heel stuff. So he's going to drop the Kato part of his name. He's just going to be Homare.
He's going to be Homare. And then, so they've got a show. So Monday's a national holiday in Japan. It is, I think, National Respect Your Elders Day, I think is the official name of that holiday. So they're running a show in Sendai. It's their Gate of Origin show, which is, it's like a champion gate. It's not a big show, but it's bigger than some of the other shows that they run. And they are running on that show. They're running Z-Brat. So it's going to be Homare, Jason Lee, Kai, Coach Minoru, and Shun Skywalker against Mad Blanky, who, because it's the 25th anniversary of Dragongate, they've had some throwback Mad Blanky appearances. Blanky. Yeah. So it's going to be all those Z-Brats guys against Yamato, BB Hulk, KZ, Prom Dragon, and Punch Tamanaga. And they're all going to be doing their Mad Blanky character on that show.
Well, you know what I want? I want some deep drunkers.
You and only you.
Me and only me. I love the deep drunkers.
Which is so funny as a teetotaler.
Right. Kenichiro Arai is like tearing up the scummy indies, though.
I know. And normally he's booked in Tokyo. He wasn't on this show. He normally shows up on these Korakuen shows.
Yeah, he's been tearing up a lot of the scummy indies and getting rave reviews from, the deep puros.
Isn't it so sad that, like, the Segunda Kata types have hand-waved Dragongate for 20 years, and now they decide that Kenichiro Arai, who I love, is like the best wrestler of the group because of the work he's doing on Japanese micro indies. That is such a bummer.
It is. I mean, look, we're the real ones. We knew what was up with Arai for many years. At least
that's accurate. Yes.
Yeah. I was a deep drunker supporter for a long time. How about some Typhoon? Let's get some Typhoon. Actually, they're probably all gone, huh? They're probably.
She was gone. Pac's gone. Hulk is a shell of himself. Yeah. Typhoon's probably not the one to do.
That wouldn't be the best reunion.
It'd be a little tough. That also wasn't a great unit to begin with, but certainly hard to reunite.
Put Typhoon back together. Again, not your big brother's Dragongate. Deep Drunkers and Typhoon references, because, I'm running this thing. This is a good spot to talk business. I'm going to get back into the show, but you did mention that they pretty much packed Korakuen for this. Near 1492, Chris Columbus number, is that what it was here?
I think it's something like that. I know they had the north side of Korakuen divided into 2 sections, which somebody on Twitter said that's the first time they've done that post-COVID, which is a good sign.
Well, yeah, I mean, New Japan just ran back-to-back shows there this week and did 1384 and 1190. Mm-hmm. And, they had title matches on both shows, a TV title match with Jeff Cobb versus Yota Tsuji. And then the next night was Hanare versus Hiromu Takahashi. Okay, those aren't, Dragon Gate's putting it open. The Dream Gate match in there, I get that. But even so, you look at the Korakuens from the G1, and those were super no vacancy sellouts, and those were 1504. So to do 1492, it's a sellout. Can we just call it a sellout?
Also, it's abnormal for Dragongate to do a Dreamgate match in Korakuen. They hover around 12 to 1300 for the most part, and very, very rarely do a title match in Korakuen.
Well, 12 to 1300. I mean, that's the point I'm getting to, is they've always been the kings of Korakuen, especially when they were really cooking, 10, 15 years ago. And I'm not sure a lot of people realize that they would outdraw everybody.
They had a sellout streak. They had a sellout streak from 2012 to May of 2018 where they sold out every Korakuen Hall show they ran.
Right. And even New Japan, when they were hot, weren't doing that. They wouldn't always have sellouts. So it's good to see that they're still in some ways the kings of Korakuen, and filling that place up for a show like this. How's the rest of the business? Because, look, I know that they've been fudging the numbers on some of them a little, okay? Because
I think at this point everybody is, but Dragongate certainly is. There's no denying that.
We've seen the pictures, Case Lowe. Okay, so I know that some of these reported attendances are a little shaky when you look at pictures and stuff, but give us a quick overview of how they're doing business-wise outside of Korakuen, because maybe, I think a lot of our listeners are the nerdy types who understand that unlike some of the other companies in Japan, Dragongate basically runs the entire country. Okay, this isn't one of these promotions that just runs a specific area of the country. So how has the attendance been in 2024 outside of Korakuen?
Yeah, I mean, they're not even based in Tokyo like most companies are. They're based in Kobe, and their Kobe business has been really strong this year. They just ran a show at the beginning of this month, or maybe it was the end of August, I guess end of August or whatever, called The Gate of Miyagi. And they have a special guest. He's a Japanese TV personality. I don't know much about his background, but the whole gimmick was that this guy Miyagi booked the entire show, and they sold out Kobe Sambo Hall days in advance, which if you talk to anybody in Dragon, and I talk to a lot of people that go to Kobe area shows, they don't know the last time that happened. I mean, we're talking, you can go, 2014, and they weren't selling out Kobe Sambo Hall days in advance. Now, that was a special occasion, but their Kobe business is strong. The Osaka business, depending on what they do, they've ebbed and flowed there, but they're always traditionally pretty strong in Osaka, and they've got Gate of Destiny coming up in November, which is one of their tentpole shows. One of their other big markets is Fukuoka, and no one is drawing great in Fukuoka right now. We're 5 years removed from the closing of Hakata Star Lanes, and there's the issue that Dragongate is running into, and a lot of these other promotions are running into, is venues are closing in Japan, and there's not suitable replacements. So Dragongate, they lost Hakata Star Lanes, and then the other thing that really hurts is there's that mid-size venue in Nagoya, the Nagoya Conference Center. I would say out of all the markets in Japan, the market that New Japan is most rivaled in is what Dragongate does in Nagoya. It's the hometown of Ultimo Dragon. It's the hometown of Dragon Kid. It's the hometown of UT. When SB Kento was there, Kento's from Nagoya, and they would put a lot of value into him because of all the sponsors that he drew in that part of the country specifically. The problem is that Dolphins Arena, where they run Dead or Alive, that building is going away, and they're massively scaling up the venue in Nagoya to a point that Dragongate probably won't be able to run it. Probably anybody outside of New Japan won't be able to run it. And the mid-size venue there is under construction, and I think plans to open back up in 2026. I might have the year wrong there, but their business is healthy. They remind me a lot of All Japan right now. They've put their head down. They have a vision. And there's signs that things are working. The arrow is pointed up. It might not be spiking through the roof, but, as somebody that's watched Dragongate for a long time, I've seen this promotion in worse states, both in terms of business and in terms of depth and in terms of hope. I think it's a signs, maybe, again, not like double thumbs up, but things are okay right now.
Okay, so let's bounce back into the show. So this Hamare Kato wasn't the only kid that caught my eye. There was this 6-man with the Natural Vibes, KZ, Strong Machine J, and UT, and they beat Dragon Dia, Madoka Kakuta, and this Ryoya Tanaka.
Yeah, Ryoya Tanaka.
So it's very obvious to me, based on how he was presented in this match, that they believe in this kid, and they think that they've got something with him. So I have to go back to your notes because I think you had such an incredible description of him where you said he's 25, he's been wrestling 15 months, and he looks like he was created in a Dragongate lab.
Doesn't he?
He's handsome, ripped, and already has the flawlessness that they look for in all their big stars, end quote. And that kind of nails it. He's everything they look for. You know, he's a good-looking, fit guy who clearly has a high ceiling, bell to bell, and an obvious jump off the screen charisma. That's what that was obvious to me watching this match. And then they featured him strongly in the match too, even though they lost.
One of the best things to happen to him is they put him in D-Courage around this time last year. So he debuted at the end of May last year, and he debuted against Yamato, which does not happen. Guys do not wrestle Yamato in their first match. But Tanaka, we kind of knew about. He was featured in a Dragongate documentary where they talked to Yamato and Dragon Kid, and then they show footage of the dojo, and Tanaka is the highlighted pupil of the dojo. And you go, oh, this was before he debuted. You go, oh, okay. Put a tab on that name. Sure enough, he debuts. He's great immediately. So they put him in D-Courage last November, and this is 6 months into his run in the company. And then in December, Yuki Yoshioka got hurt. He hasn't wrestled all year. He's got an eye injury. He's training right now to get back in the ring, but he's been out the entire year. And so, you know, in a different world, maybe Tanaka spends the entire year wrestling Punch Tamanaga and wrestling Don Fuji and basic sort of young guy opening matches. But he's instead just been a mainline player all year, and he's wrestled main events all over the country, and he's, you know, here against the Natural Vibes A team. And I think he was far and away the biggest omission from Voices of Wrestling 30 Under 30 this year. I was delighted to see Mochizuki Jr. Placed the way that he did because I think he is a prodigy. He's the son of Masaki Mochizuki, for those that don't know, and it's obvious when you watch him wrestle. But Tanaka has as bright of an upside as anybody in this company, and it's so obvious when you watch him. Like, he'd be good in Noah. He could fit into the New Japan Junior division, but like, thank God he's in Dragongate because he is their kind of guy.
Yeah, for sure. So he's, again, really, I want to say there were three because, you know, it was my first exposure to the Yana Guyuchi kid in the opener. So, you know, and I guess they're telling a story with him. You know, look, I think it's a good thing that he probably hasn't won any matches yet because they're going to make a big deal out of it when he finally wins one.
Oh, absolutely.
So,
and he's got like, for lack of a better term, but he's got like a dorkable charisma. You know, he's got this bowl cut and this toothy smile, and he'll win in Korakuen for the first time because that's where he was an employee. That'll be a nice moment.
So I wanted to ask about Dragon Dia. So they took the mask off him. Oh, how long's the mask?
3 years ago. It's December 2021.
Man, 3 years.
I know. He's been maskless longer than he had the mask.
Oof. All right. So they take the mask off him. It's been 3 years. We've had plenty of time to assess. What do you think of that move? Because on one hand, he could have been, you know, the next generation, Ultimo Dragon, Dragon Kid, and then this guy. That was the idea behind the gimmick, right? So they take the mask off of him. Do you think this has helped him? Do you think it's worked against him? He's the Brave Gate champ right now, I think. So how do you see his career trajectory going? And what do you think now with 3 years of hindsight, the move to take the mask off of him?
I think it helped him. And this goes down to, you know, being in the nitty gritty and watching every show. But, you know, he gets his mask taken off in December of 2021. In 2022, he and Yuki Yoshioka, and this is perhaps why Joe has lost so much interest in the promotion, they were the main characters of Dragongate that year. Their faces were everywhere. Their merch was everywhere. They built this company around those two guys, and then Madoka Kakuta just happened to get hot and kind of, you know, they formed a great trio out of that. But it was a great moment for him because I weirdly think when you're supposed to be the next Ultimo Dragon and or Dragon Kid, that puts a lot of weight on your shoulders. And fans of VoiceGate know this because Jay talked about this once, but there's always been a weird expectation with him of what else can he do, because there's a story that Larry Dallas and Lenny Leonard and some of the Dragongate office were at a dinner one night, and Lenny and Larry were watching clips of El Hijo del Vikingo on their phone and going like, oh my God, you know, this guy is the future. This guy's incredible. This is about 5 years ago. And Genki Horiguchi saw the video and went, what's the big deal? Dragon Dia can do all of that. Like, who cares? Let's eat, that sort of deal, because Dia is so naturally athletic. Unfortunately, that story was told on our podcast. And so I think a lot of people have for 4 or 5 years now been going like, okay, when is he going to do that? And I think we've all accepted that he's not that wrestler, but he is, Dragongate canon. He's a part of the fabric of the day in and day out of this promotion. And I think losing the mask, because he's handsome, because he just looks like such a natural babyface, has been a benefit to him. And because he worked Super Juniors this year, it didn't do anything for New Japan. I don't know if you heard the last time Jay was on our show, but Jay said New Japan outright was not a fan. They did not like Dia and what he brought to the table. But the only way I can explain it is almost like in the 80s when a Japanese wrestler would come to America and like wrestle a match in Madison Square Garden, and then he would come back to Japan and be a bigger deal. The Dragongate fans saw that as like, oh my God, he went to New Japan. Now he's back here. This is our guy. Let's rally around him. He might be more popular now than he's ever been because of the Super Juniors tournament.
That basically answered the next question I was going to ask. I was going to ask you what you thought of the Super Junior tournament, because I saw a lot of hand wringing and complaining, because not only did he not win a match until he upset Kushida in his final match, he got squashed in a lot of his matches. I mean, he didn't even get a lot of offense, and a lot of the matches were sub 5 minutes. But see, Dragongate fans know that Dragongate has never had, as a promotion and sort of as an ethos of the place, a gigantic ego when it comes to doing jobs outside of the company.
Correct.
Historically, they're more than willing to have even their top guys do jobs outside of the company. And that's always been the case with Dragongate. So the fact that Dia went 1-9 or however many matches there were, 1-8, 1-9, how many? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I think you went 1-8 or something like that. The point is, it didn't shock me. But what did raise an eyebrow a little watching the tournament is how little respect he got in terms of the match layouts. But you made a little comment there that caught my attention. You said Dragongate just doesn't get him. Not Dragongate. New Japan just doesn't get him, and they don't like his vibe, and maybe that had something to do with it. But I was going to ask you your perspective on how he did in that tournament, but I think you already answered it. It's in the eyes of Dragongate fans, because maybe they understand what I just explained. These guys never win outside of Dragongate. They're more than happy to send their wrestlers elsewhere for the exposure. They don't politic. I mean, look, they split all those matches with ETU at WrestleMania weekend, and ETU is just a tiny New Jersey indie in America. I mean, there's no ego when it comes to that stuff with Dragongate. So to bounce off of that, I'm going to ask you the same question about Luis Monte's run in the N1. How much of it did you see, and what did you think?
I watched almost all of it because, one, Monte just is a fascinating wrestler to me, and two, I thought he did very well. I really liked the Kiyomiya match. I don't remember if it was Alpha Wolf or Dragon Bane. I don't remember which one he wrestled, but I thought that was really strong as well. That is, Monte's such an interesting guy, right? He came in 5 years ago when Ultimo came back to Dragongate. He came in to basically be Ultimo's personal bumper because he knew traditional lucha that Ultimo also knew. And when COVID happened, there was a number of foreigners over in the dojo. There were some guys from Mexico and some guys from America, and Martin Kirby. And Martin Kirby said, "Fuck this, I'm retiring." And the rest of the guys went home. Monte stayed. He got better and became family. He is Dragongate. He's a former Dreamgate champion. So I don't know. It's always weird with Dragongate, and this will come up in one of the other matches that I hope we have time to talk about. But like, Dragongate fans don't care about other promotions typically. All they know is that they went there. So I would imagine it's a net positive for Monte. It might be a little too soon to see if there's any long-term ramifications there. But on a personal level, I really enjoyed his N1. I enjoyed the N1 a lot on a personal level up until the final few nights where I thought it just totally fell apart.
Well, I mean, they put him over Kaito Kiyomiya on night one. Of course, the meme is that Kiyomiya loses to everybody, but
except for in Dragon Gate, where he was super respected and won the Twin Gate titles and was awesome in Dragon Gate.
The place he's least respected is the place he works. I mean, well, I guess New Japan kind of took a big old dump on him in the G1 last year too, when he didn't even get out of his block. But
Dragon Gate welcomed him with open arms. He was so awesome. It made me want him to jump so bad. He wrestled Jason Lee and Jackie Kame in January, and then Doi and Dragon Kid in May. And both of those matches were so good. And Kiyomiya kind of did like cosplay Dragon Gate wrestler in the best way possible.
Yeah. All right, let's get through some of these other matches. So the semi-main was gold class. It was Hulk and Benkei, Mochizuki Jr., and I guess we're calling this man Rita now.
Unfortunately, Dragon Gate has once again made my life very hard with the way they name their wrestlers. The former Minorita is now Rita with 3 eyes. I don't know why.
I don't know. And it was Jason Lee, Kai. Kai.
No. I'm going to stop you right there, Joe. Kai is.
Here we go.
It's unbelievable the disrespect this guy gets. And by the way, Kai in Wrestle 1, one of the worst wrestlers I've ever seen. He's a contracted Dragon Gate wrestler.
Yes, he is.
Who, if his name wasn't Kai, wouldn't bother you at all.
I disagree.
Okay, fair enough.
I don't like the guy. I've never liked the guy. I grant you, he's much better than he was 10 years ago in his Wrestle 1 days. He's much better than he was when he was doing Dean Ambrose cosplay and the jumping
worst.
jacks. Remember the jumping jacks?
Yes. Oh God.
The jeans and the dirty wife beater and the jumping jacks to the song and everything. That was awful. But no, I have not come around on Kai.
Fair enough.
Maybe I am digging the heels in. Who knows? But Kota Minoura and Shun Skywalker. So I'm watching this match, and they're basically just brawling up the steps in Korakuen. Every promotion, no matter what it is, has to have one match on the card where everybody just brawls up the steps in Korakuen. This was the one. And then then Johnny Valletta shows up, and he's doing his Bruiser Brody deal, and he's just beating the shit out of all the baby faces or whatever. And he is just, and I know he's been to Dragon Gate before, but he hasn't been there in a while, right? It's been a while since he's...
So he debuted in January. He wrestled through the first Korakuen in May, and he's been gone ever since. He's been gone about 3 months.
So this is the Bruiser Brody impersonator. I guess that's not fair, because Bruiser Brody is still one of the most copied wrestlers in the world, some 35 years after his death or whatever. Mm-hmm. So it's not like this guy's alone. Okay, it's a gimmick that works, that a lot of people have totally aped over the years. He's one of them. People might remember him from All Japan, billed from Malta, I believe.
That's correct.
He first was exposed during some dark times in All Japan, doing the same gimmick he's doing here. He's more ripped now. This guy's got like an 8-pack. Like,
yeah, he's in Dragon Gate. That's what they do.
Yeah, so he's totally ripped. I don't know what they're fucking doing. Is Sisha still running the fucking training over there? Like,
no, Sisha hasn't run the training in a decade. But
I'm right on top of things like usual.
The guys they have running the dojo are also very ripped.
Yeah. So whoever's in charge of this, not the guy I thought.
Super Shisa runs a taco stand in Kobe now, and by all accounts, it's going very, very well.
Well, good for him. I always enjoyed his working the pre-show match on the big Dragon Gate shows.
He's unironically one of my favorite wrestlers ever. I have nothing but bad things, or nothing but good things to say about him.
I'd fire up the Fire Pro. He'd be one of the first guys I picked every time.
Absolutely.
Like, how am I using Super Sheik? Because he had such cool moves and everything. One of the lowest rated guys in the entire game. But I'd try to critical people with fucking Super Sisha and his Lave, whatever the fuck you say that. Is he even a Lave wrestler? He is.
Yes, he is.
Yeah,
he excels at it.
So I don't want Grant Akuma yelling at me after he listens to this, so I got to make sure I got my facts right. But Valletta here, I mean, the guy was ripped, and he's doing the Brody thing, and I guess he's back, Case Lowe. So talk us through this a little bit here.
So I think the booking of Gianni Valletta this year is one of the great wins that Dragon Gate has ever had, because he came out in January on their Korakuen show, and he did this gimmick, and I actually think he beat Daiki Yanagiuchi in his first match, and it was crickets in Korakuen. Nobody knew who he was. Nobody knew what he was doing there. it was cold and awkward and uncomfortable. And Mike Spears was done with it from the jump.
Yeah.
And I said, Mike, here's the thing. This did not get over. This was kind of weird. But I wouldn't have changed a single thing about the way they presented it. Let's just see what they do from here. In show after show, he comes through the crowd. He disrupts all the chairs, and he also attacks all the young boys, which is important. I'll get to that in just a second. And by the time March rolled around, that was the first time or the second time they're in Osaka this year. And I know somebody who goes to a lot of the shows in the Osaka area, and he sent me a note. He was like, dude, the vibe in the building when Valletta comes out now is unbelievable. There's children crying all over the arena because Dragon Gate fans, they might know the name Bruiser Brody, but they have no attachment to him. He's not a Brody knockoff in the Dragon Gate universe. He's the terrifying wrestler from Malta. And so he started getting these crazy reactions because much like Brody in All Japan, it became part of the show. It was like, oh my God, Valletta's going to come out. I kind of hope he tears up my section. And it became a massive win for them in the spring. Now, we had a Dreamgate match that didn't go great. He and Monte just didn't have chemistry. It didn't work out. But before he left to go back to Malta, Rita returned from injury, tore his ACL last year. So the last thing that we saw was the smallest guy on the roster, a guy who's legitimately like 5'1", challenging Gianni Valletta to a match. And Ryo Saito, who's their GM, said he's like, all right, when Valletta comes back, you can get your match. And so nobody knew Valletta was going to be on this show. They play that siren now before he comes out to warn the crowd that they need to get out of their area. And then he came through Korakuen, raised hell, and then they set up the same show with the Mad Blanky match. They're going to do Valletta versus Rita. So I know you and Rich shit on this a few months ago, and it like greatly hurt my feelings because it was in the midst of him really being endearing and being this massive win for Dragon Gate where they took a risk on a guy and like he does Dragon Gate 8-mans and 6-mans now where he's a part of the match and he's doing the Brody thing, but he still can have a sequence with KZ or with Dragon Dia. And I look at his inclusion in this company just as a massive win.
It's such a wild dichotomy to everything else that I think it works.
Yeah, exactly. It's so different. It's so not Dragon Gate to a point that it is on the other end of the pendulum where it's like, well, this is kind of Dragon Gate. Like, this is something really different. And they've got him wrestling Rita, who that match is going to be bizarre. I don't know what it's going to look like.
I know what it's going to look like. It's going to throw that little fucker all over the place is what it's going to look like.
And Rita, exactly you're right. And Rita is phenomenal. He has an amateur wrestling background. And so Masaki Mochizuki does these produce shows that have a lot of like, karate guys, and it's a more faux MMA than it is a typical Dragon Gate show. And Rita did one of those shows a few months ago and wrestled like Kurt Angle, and it like blew all of our minds. And now we just want him to do that character in Dragon Gate. I don't know if we'll ever get it, but he has a very prominent amateur wrestling background actually. So there's a part of me that really wants him to take Valletta down with like a double leg.
So in typical bury the lead fashion, I open up with Punch Tamanaga, and now we have to cram in the Dreamgate talk.
And I have so much to say, so let's get to it.
Yeah, so Yamato retains the title over Ishin. To somebody parachuting in, it was kind of an overbooked mess to me. But I'm going to let you talk everybody through the match, and maybe you'll have me come around on it.
Well, I think it was an overbooked mess, but I look at it as more of a net positive than anything. You have Ishin, who, for those that don't know, his father was Ishin Riki, who was a wrestler in the 90s, and then his mother was also a wrestler. So he and his brother debuted 3 years ago together, and the whole gimmick was they were Japan's first supernovas. They came from an entire wrestling family. And his brother retired probably 2 years ago now, and he's just one of those guys that, like, he wanted to be an actor, and then he became a wrestler, and then he became a bodybuilder after wrestling. And he's, everybody has a guy in their life who has a new hobby every 8 months, and that is what his brother is. He's just going to bounce around to thing after thing after thing. But Ishin stayed, and after his brother left, it took him a long time to find his footing, and he turned heel. He turned heel on Mochizuki Jr., and, as a heel, it really didn't click for a while. And then he just started putting on all of this weight around this time last year. And he got really heavy and big, but he could still move. And the comp that is popular right now among, people like Alan Farrell and myself is that he reminds us of not Dick Togo, but all caps Sato from like 1994, 1995 Michinoku Pro, where he's bigger and wider than most of this roster, but he can still move really quickly. And they've kept him on the undercard as like a dominant undercard threat this year. And then at Dangerous Gate, Yamato defended the belt against Madoka Kakuta, and he wins the match. He cuts the go home promo. The Dragon Gate theme song is playing. People are leaving the building. And then Ishin runs out and attacks him and says, I want a match. They do the match at Korakuen here. And I don't know what 25 minutes of traditional straight wrestling would have looked like. So they did what Dragon Gate does every once in a while, which is, more akin to like an Attitude Era main event, which I have very, limited taste for. I don't particularly like that style of wrestling, except for when Dragon Gate does it, instead of, a traditional Japanese heavyweight main event. The difference is, I think, with a lesser main eventer than Yamato, somebody not as talented as him, I think this match could have fallen apart very easily, but I ended up going notebook on it. I went 4 stars because I was buying into the chaos as it went about. And the other thing that's important to note is 2 matches earlier, you had Kato turn heel and join Z-Brats. Then you had Valletta return, and he's a part of Z-Brats. When I was watching this show, Unspoiled, I was thinking, like, good God, like, they might put the belt on Ishin because they've gone crazy in the last hour. I don't know what this match is going to bring, but I get the feeling it left you a little cold.
Yeah, it was just a little too overbooked for my taste. And I'm also someone who, again, is parachuting in. So I'm watching it thinking, all right, maybe I'm missing some details here. And maybe like these run-ins and things like that are more meaningful than to someone who's, following this day in and day out than they are to me,
I think the one thing that you're missing, and this is the one thing I want to get in, so I'm glad we just have enough time, is if you've watched Dragon Gate before, there's a good chance that you've seen Yamato as Dream Gate champion. And I think for a lot of English speakers, that is not the most exciting thing. But Yamato right now, if he's not doing the best work of his career, he's the most energized and exciting he's been since 2015 when he turned babyface. So Yamato won the belt at Kobe World, and Joe, he cut this show closing promo, and I'm sure you've experienced this, where even though you don't speak a word of Japanese, you're watching the promo and you realize in the moment, like, oh shit, this must be good. Like, he's feeling it, the crowd's feeling it, and Yamato cuts this promo where he starts crying, and the rough translation is basically like, look, a lot of people have left this place. Fuck them. I will die in this ring. I will die for Dragon Gate. I am your Dream Gate champion. And then the next day, he went on Twitter and he buried Shima and T-Hawk underneath the earth. And I know this not just from the machine translations, but I have a good friend who's a Voice Gate listener. He lives in Japan. He's a professional translator. And I said, dude, you got to give me all the details on this. And he told this story on Twitter about how he and Shima got hurt on a show about 15 years ago, and they were driving to the hospital together. And Shima in the car ride said, hey, just a reminder, you're a mid-carder. You're always going to be a mid-carder. This is my company. Just remember that. And Yamato at the time was like, Shima, I guess he's right. And then later went, who the fuck does he think he is? I'm going to take his spot. And then he buried T-Hawk for treating all the dojo guys poorly. Like, I don't know if people know this. Other than Shima, everybody hates T-Hawk. Eita hates T-Hawk. Ben K, Shun Skywalker, Yuki Yoshioka, Hyo, all those guys hate T-Hawk. Yamato hates T-Hawk. Everybody in wrestling other than Shima hates this guy. And he started explaining how when T-Hawk took over the dojo from Yamato and Shingo, he acted like a real asshole towards Shun and Ben and all those guys. He talked about how much money he was making when all those kids in the dojo had no money. And again, Yamato was like, fuck anybody that's left. This is my company. It's going to be my company until I say so. And I would rather die than leave Dragon Gate. And so he's become like the promoter's wet dream of a champion. And every match he's had since has been a little bit different. The Ben match at World was different than the Kakuta match at Dangerous Gate. This was way different than either of those matches. But this isn't lazy babyface Yamato, which we've seen before, and I've been harshly critical of. This could be the run of Yamato's career, and the people that are watching every show right now are really into what Yamato's doing.
Well, T-Hawk was talking about retiring.
I know. He always talks about retiring, but Shima always has a job for him.
So is that sort of born of the idea that nobody likes the guy, and he really, if it wasn't for Shima, he probably wouldn't get booked anywhere?
I believe so. I mean, look, those guys were supposed to move to Mexico before COVID happened and get pushed in AAA and AEW, and then COVID took that off the table, and now Glade is a fake promotion, and they stole a bunch of Dragongate guys and then did nothing with them, and I'm sure a lot of those guys are now regretting that decision because Dragongate won't touch them. They hate them. Right. Everybody other than Flamita. And so, yeah, I mean, I think T-Hawk's a fine wrestler, but he's got no political allies other than Shima. And again, everybody in Dragongate hates him.
Yeah. So does Lindemann get heat by association? Or
Lindemann gets heat by association, but the prevailing thought has always been if one of those three were going to come back, it would be Lindemann. It might be weird, and it probably won't ever happen, but Lindemann is a closer to Switzerland than anything else, where it's like, well, we wish he wouldn't have done that, but we like him. And, if there was an opportunity maybe in the future, I wish he would just fucking go to New Japan. I think he would crush it in that division, but I don't think that's going to happen.
But your Yoshiokas and people like that, they're just persona non grata now. You've made your decision. They've essentially napalmed the bridge.
Ashita, yeah. Because Yoshioka's still there, but the group is Shima and T-Hawk and Lindemann, and again, Shima and T-Hawk are kind of on their own island, and then Kaito Ashita, who we don't need to get into that whole thing.
Yeah. Ashita's, that's what I meant. Yeah.
And I mean, Ashita doesn't even get booked in All Japan anymore. The guy is ice cold. He's not over in Glade. It's there's nothing there for him because there was a lot of misreporting about that, and I think there's still some believed truths that Mike and I debunked on our podcast, but there is truth to the fact that he was annoyed that they picked Coach Minoura over him, and right. That remains true, and they're not going to give up on Minoura anytime soon, nor do I think they should. So,
right. So
the root of it is like, hey, if you're new to Dragongate, or maybe if you're a lapsed fan, yes, Yamato's Dreamgate champion. I understand that might not be the sexiest thing, but this is his time, and if you've ever heard Pac or Ricochet or Matt Seidel or any of these English speakers talk about Dragongate, the word they always use is family. We're a family here, and Dragongate has started using that as their tagline. So one of the big things coming out of that Yamato Kobe World promo, which again caused a bunch of controversy in Japan because he was very open and very honest. He called out people that don't get talked about in Dragongate. He said, we're a family here. And he started crying. And that's when, again, he's like, I'd rather die in the ring, basically, than leave this promotion. So I'm going to be the Dreamgate champion until somebody fucking beats me. And now we're where we are.
Yeah. He almost does come across. He does have an energy where he's kind of the godfather of the place now.
Oh, my God. Yeah. I mean, again, Yoshino is persona non grata. Shima is persona non grata. He's the guy, and Doi could be the guy, but Doi's off doing other things. I know last week when Rich said he's not up on Dragongate, and so he doesn't know about their tag team of the year contenders. You scoffed at that idea. Let me tell you, Dragon Kid and Naruki Doi will be number one on my tag team ballot this year. They've been phenomenal, but Yamato's the guy, and Yamato has been the guy since 2016, if not a little bit before that, and this feels like the run that for the hardcore Dragongate fan, this will be the run that defines his career.
I think Doi has been outstanding in all
unbelievable.
Japan.
He's so good. He's
just a total different style of junior champion.
I love him. I love him in All Japan. And in Dragongate, he's been great too. Again, he and Dragon Kid are doing this team where they won the tag league, then they won the Twin Gate belts from Kiyomiya and Alejandro. And if you like him in All Japan, Naruki Doi and Dragongate, believe it or not, still very good.
Yeah. Doi, I mean, his work in All Japan, I think, has been just exceptional.
I'm with you.
So much different than how junior champions typically work. So yeah, we hit on every match. I mean, there's one match that I didn't bring up and I refuse to bring up because it's a Toru Owashi match, and I don't want to talk about Toru Owashi. And it was kind of a push-pull with me because Suji Kondo was in that match, and I love Suji Kondo, although he's lost a step. He's not the guy.
He's lost a step. My nickname for Owashi at Open the Voice Gate is Net Positive Owashi because I know his presence, despite the fact that he is a Dragongate or Toribon trainee, and this has always been his home promotion, and he left for a while. But he was in the tag league with Kondo this year, had a 4-star match against Shimazu and Strong Machine J, and at no point, and look, I've seen Toru Owashi matches that I fucking hate. at no point this year has his presence been bothersome. And it has in the past. But this year, and this is his final full-time year in wrestling, is going to go part-time after this year. He is net positive Awashi.
Good. I've had problems with that guy since like 2004. I can't stand him. He's just such a negative presence to me.
Oh man, he had one fantastic tag match this year, but I would rather focus my energy on you starting to like Dragongate Kai rather than Toru Awashi. That's a better use of my time.
Toru Awashi has been a skip for me since like the Mega Upload days. I have no fucking time. Literally have no time for Toru Awashi to the point where that's the only match I'm skipping here. Not that there's a lot to break down.
Any other promotion, I don't watch his matches, but Dragongate, I watch everything, and he has not been a bother this year. But I get it. I'm not going to try to convince you otherwise on Awashi.
I mean, Kondo was in that match too. He's not exactly one of my all-time faves either. So it's like, I fought through it, you know.
You never watched. Did you watch last year Susumu and Kanda against Kano and Shuji Kondo?
I don't have any recollection of that, no.
Dude, you would not believe, for all the shit matches that he's put you through, it's the performance of a lifetime from Yasushi Kanda. He sells the leg in that match like you would not fucking believe. It's one of my favorite Twin Gate matches ever because Kano, should be in Dragongate. He's just a natural fit. And it's him and Kondo against Susumu and Kondo, who are the first Dragongate tag team in history. And it made a lot of bad Yasushi Kondo matches worth it just to get there.
All right. I'll leave you with this. I have a comp for Ishin.
Great.
It's not a flattering one.
Ah, damn.
But it's just based on his new thick boy look and the way his face looks. I cannot watch this guy without thinking about Danshoku Dino. He looks like Danshoku Dino.
God, that sucks.
Casey looks like him. Look, he's not out there doing gay panic spots. That's not what I'm saying.
No, he is not.
Okay?
Let the record show.
All right, that's not. He just looks like him. I'm looking at this guy's face and his hair, and I'm like, this motherfucker looks like Danshoku Dino, who's like my least favorite wrestler of all time.
Yeah, join the club. So you I know we got to go, but so you like this show didn't do anything for you, did it?
No, it was all right. I mean, look, I didn't dislike my time with it. I mean,
okay,
that's not exactly a ringing endorsement. Hey, I didn't dislike my time with you. I'd love to go on a second date, ma'am. But no, look, on the scale of recent vintage Dragongate shows, accounting for the fact that I'm parachuting in, I had a decent time. I liked a lot of the angles. I thought the Homare Kato thing definitely worked. I thought that the Johnny Valletta thing was just so absurd that it worked. And I had this odd enjoyment of the Punch Tamanaga opener. It's like my third favorite match on the show.
That sucks to hear.
It connected with me. The kid, trying to beat Punch Tamanaga.
Yeah.
I'm like, shit, he's going to lose to this fucking rookie because he's Punch Tamanaga, and no, but he pulled it out in the end. So no, it wasn't a show that I disliked. I'm not at the level of you and some other people who were saying that this was like the best Korakuen show of the year and things like that. I'm not going to go that far, but I enjoyed myself. How's that?
Fine. It's so funny to me because like I when I watch New Japan now, I feel the way you do with Dragongate because I think there's so much more. I feel like there's so much more in common with 2024 Dragongate and 2014 Dragongate than there is 2024 New Japan and 2014 New Japan, because I think the way New Japan has structured their stories now, like peak Bushi Road, they thrived on these really organic stories that just came about with Ishin and Hanma, and the build of Naito was this entirely organic thing. And now their mode of storytelling is guy goes on excursion and then we expect him to be a main eventer. It's like they Randy Orton these guys where they just tell us he's a star with no evidence to back it up. And one of the things that we talked about a lot on VoiceGate is, this promotion might have unfamiliar names to a lot of people, but man, if you go back to 2016, 2017, 2018, even when Shima and Yoshino and Shingo and all these guys were there, like this promotion is healthier and it's more interesting, and a lot of times it's better, and it might not have that tippy top ceiling that the peak of Dragongate has had, but then again, to me, that's like the best wrestling that's ever existed. But I still feel, whether it's 2-word Dragongate or 1-word Dragongate, I still feel the spirit of this promotion compared to any point at its absolute peak. And I watch New Japan now, and I just don't get that at all.
Hey, I'm not feeling anything in Japan right now. I'm on record as saying, and I've been watching this shit for a long time. I'm on record as saying this is the least interesting period of Japanese wrestling as a whole since I've been a fan. And I would at the very least co-sign the idea it's the weakest the junior heavyweights have been in the 21st century. No doubt about that. Yeah, I really get depressed thinking about, especially, outside of Dragongate, because again, I like this roster so much, but like, I don't get excited for Super Juniors anymore. And that used to be, I used to pitch in for Super Juniors reviews on the website because it was like, well, let me take a few of these off your hands, guys. I'd be more than happy to. And the junior heavyweight scene, good juniors go to Dai and Noah. You would watch Alejandro and Noah, and then you see what he does in Dragongate. It's like 2 totally different people. All Japan at least has Doi to carry some of these guys around. But yeah, the junior scene is dire, and it's really disappointing. Yeah, for me, there's just nothing in Japan right now to really sink my teeth into. All Japan. Are you closest with All Japan? Is that the promotion? I mean, they're doing some nice things, but if I couldn't watch, if you told me for whatever reason All Japan weren't going to bring cameras to their shows anymore, I wouldn't lose an ounce of sleep. Interesting. Yeah, you know what I mean? It's like yeah. It's fine, and they're doing some good things, and I enjoy the shows that I watch well enough. But now, if you told me that for peak New Japan or some peak eras of Noah or All Japan or Dragongate, I'd be fucking moving to Japan to make sure I can still see the shit. Of course. It's like there's nothing in Japan that makes me feel like that right now. And it's I really, truly, honestly believe I'm not chasing the hyperbole or looking to put out the hot take. I think this is the least interesting period of Puro in my, and I follow this stuff closely since the early 90s. Yeah. And and obviously I've gone back and watched stuff from before then to have a good feel for a lot of the eras in the 80s as well. This is the least interesting period I've ever experienced, even during some of the dark days when, MMA nearly killed pro wrestling. I would even go as far as to say this is less interesting because there was always at least something to watch even during those darkest times. God. I mean, you're talking, 2003 New Japan might have been the worst shit ever, but you had Noah and you had Toryumon and, exactly. 0-1 stuff. Yeah. No, I'm with you. Look, we talk about this on VoiceGate a lot, Dragongate again, like I really like this promotion. I will once again fight really hard for some of these guys in FSM 50 because I still think top to bottom, this is, other than AEW, which is, a different league, this is to me as good of a roster as there is. To me, way less dead weight than a lot of the other Japanese companies right now. So, but I'm with you. I mean, look, even though I'm 25, I've been watching this stuff now pretty consistently for 12 years. No, you're a student of the game. Oh, very much so. I want to talk to you at some point, not on this podcast, but I've been going through 1993 AAA recently, and I know that's kind of one of your sweet spots. I'm watching it for the first time now. I have a lot of thoughts on it. It's very, very interesting. I think everybody should spend some time on the fascinating time and place for a promotion. It so is. Watch the Roy Lucier has all of the 1993 AAA TV on his YouTube channel. Watch the TV, read the Observer, and then go and do the next one. It's fascinating. It's the most fun I've had with a viewing project in years. But and that's exactly what I mean. You've always been a student of the game. You're a big Stan Hansen guy. You'll go back and watch old footage. 80s All Japan is some of my favorite wrestling ever, and people don't think of the Dragongate guy as an 80s All Japan head, but that's my stuff. That's what I really like watching. You're talking jumbo All Japan. You're not even talking pillars All Japan. No. I mean, I think that I like Choshu and Yatsu from All Japan. When they came in. To me, that is some of the greatest wrestling that's ever existed. Is when Choshu comes in and fucking speeds up Jumbo. He's not falling asleep on the mat anymore because Jinru at that point had blown by him as a worker. But no, you get the late 80s All Japan stuff. I mean, that's some of my favorite wrestling there is, and I'm almost bummed. I get it, but I'm almost bummed you had Cubs on to do the preview for CMLL because I watch every CMLL show that makes tape almost now. I was not a Lucha guy for so many years, and now not only am I full blown obsessed with contemporary CMLL, but I've made a point to go back and watch Peak Mystico, and I just went through
basically 2004 to 2006 and all of the stuff that I could find. And that was so interesting to watch. And I really, really now I want to understand early 90s AAA because, you hear a lot about it, but I hadn't seen the footage, and going through it now, it's really, really interesting to go back and watch.
Yeah, special time and place for sure. One of those promotions that was. But yeah, I do, that's why you were anointed the young boy, not just because you were a literal child at the time.
Literal child.
But
it's amazing. 15 years old arguing with Dylan Hales about Puerto Rico takes. I wonder what went wrong early in life to get to that point.
Yeah, but you put in the work and you watch the old footage and you can talk ball with anyone if it's something that you've seen. We all have our blind spots, of course, but you can talk ball with anyone. And I've been talking behind the scenes with a lot of different people, and I really think it's this wasn't a place I was going to go on this podcast, but I really want to start pushing forward some of the newer people on the scene and the younger people on the scene. You've been at it a long time, but you're young, who are the true ball talkers, because that's disappearing.
Dude, it sucks. I don't understand it. Like,
it's whatever differences I may have had with opinions with people like Dylan Hales, with the DVDVR crew, with the PWO crew. Those were ball talkers.
Yes.
And unfortunately, in current wrestling, it's not hip or trendy to talk ball. There's sort of this anti-smart mindset that has spread, which I don't like, and we have to push back on it. So it's why I'm trying to feature people like you and the backup Hangman, who I think people have the wrong impression of. That guy knows his shit.
I love the post show. I thought it was excellent audio.
Well, like you, he's a little older than you, but he's a student of history, and he goes back and watches shit, and he tries to learn and understand. And he's another guy. And Jesse Collins is someone who I think approaches wrestling because he has his own different opinions on things that sometimes go against the grain, but they always come from a place that is well thought out. And there's Suit Williams, who I think Suit Williams is tremendous.
Suit Williams is the fucking man. I really, really value the work that he does, and I value his opinion on things.
Yeah, and he's not afraid to annoy people. You can't be afraid to let it fly. I mean, there's this woman on Twitter, this Lyric Wrestling. I mean, she may not approach it in the same way that I approach it in her analysis, but I mean, I'll glance at my Twitter feed and she's watching DDT shows live at 3:00 in the morning. This is someone who's putting in the work and loves the wrestling and watches it and has takes that have value. And we don't have enough of people like some of the people I just named. And I know I'm leaving some out, but we have to cultivate the next generation of ball talkers. We have to. And I think it's very important. And I'm going to do my part to expose you guys the best I can to people so we can get away from all this tribalism bullshit and all this surface level analysis and just saying that people cook and having no depth in the conversation. It's fucking nonsense. Okay. And we have to push back on this anti-smart stuff that's been happening too. Okay. That's a bunch of nonsense too. We're not going to let people rewrite history on periods of time and wrestlers who fucking stunk. Okay, we're not going to do it. You can have all the rosy childhood memories you want. There's nothing wrong with that. I have my own, but we can still be honest in our assessments, and there can still be corners of this fandom, okay, that are dirty smarks and embrace this thing in a super nerdy ball talking way. And I'm going to do my best to expose the next generation of those people. As for whatever reason, there's just not a lot of us left, man. There's the Saguna Keita guys who are doing their thing. Again, Matt D.
They're insane. I hate their takes, but I'm so glad they exist.
Exactly. That's exactly it. I very rarely agree. Matt D. This guy has had such insightful takes on the Will Ospreay Bryan Danielson match, on the AEW pay-per-view from the other night. And again, do I agree with him 100%? No. But my God, that is the epitome of a ball talker. And he's wasting it on Twitter. Where he just gets dunked on every time he says something. And he's one of the smartest people out there. And, and that's an OG ball talker, but it's important to me to cultivate that next generation and to make sure that I can do my little part with my little platform to expose you guys. I mean, this segment was great, Case. You're going to have flowers thrown at you. I can tell you that right now, because when it comes to Dragongate, like I joked about at the top, I mean, you're arguably the number 2 expert of all time to ever walk the globe with this promotion and the Dragon and the Dragon system. And it shined through in what you were talking about here. And we need more of this. and we need less of whatever the fuck else is happening out there. So excuse my rant. I didn't mean to do this.
I'm lockstep with you. I mean, again, 10 years ago, it felt like an arms race to watch as much footage as humanly possible because you had the advent of the network and streaming was getting underway. We didn't have to buy DVDs for every show anymore. And it was, you and me and Alan against an entire forum on PWO. But I learned a lot from those guys. I learned a lot of history from those guys. And, again, like Dylan Hales and I like we've lost Dylan to discourse, and I think it sucks. And I know he's evolved past that stage in his life, but like I might not agree with a lot of what Dylan says, but God, do I value his opinion.
Yeah. No, for sure. And I still talk to him privately from time to time, but yeah, he's largely out of that. We're running out. The ball talkers are disappearing because why would they want to get involved?
No, I mean, it's not like Alan is super active on Twitter anymore.
Why would you be?
Yeah, because he has people try to puro-splain him when he complains about no one. It's like, can you not do that to Alan 4L, please?
The smartest people have all stopped posting on Twitter. The smartest people have all stopped doing it. It's just grumpy British fuckers who are annoyed that their scene fell apart, and the people doing the tribalism. That's it, And you even look at a guy like Ibu who had to go behind a locked account because he had one take that people didn't like, and he got dogpiled and racism and death threats and everything. You know the game. I mean, and that And that poor fucker is behind a locked account now. And I always try to tell him, just get the fuck off of there.
I really like our Discord. I was very slow to join the Discord. It existed for a long time before I was in there, but I really, the channels that I operate in, old school and some of the modern Puro channels. And then, I look at the gossipy channels, but I don't normally post on them. Like it's
right.
There's good conversation if you go down the right avenue there.
If you're looking for it, you can still find it. It's just harder to find these days. And, again, this is probably a conversation for another day, even though we just had it. But yeah. So anyway, I just wanted to put you over, and
I appreciate that. Joe, I very much appreciate it.
I tell you how much I appreciate you and the work you put in, and it's important. And we need more ball talkers, man. And you're definitely one of them. And I even find it, myself getting off course sometimes, but what we do here, it's a catch-all show, and sometimes we have to talk about business stuff and everything. But I really love segments like this, and the one that preceded you with Cubs, where it's just, it's just talking ball. We really, there's no that we can't let that go away. We can't let that get eaten up by grifters and tribalism and all this horse shit that's kind of taken over. But anyway, Case, we are way over time. And as noted, you got to get up in like 10 minutes for work.
That's just about, yeah.
So I was going to wrap up the show with a separate segment, but I'm just going to ask you to shut the fuck up as I wrap up the flagships. You're going to be here for the close of the show. So I want to thank you, Case Lowe, for coming on. I think you did a tremendous job catching everybody up on Dragongate. I want to thank CubsFan for coming on and helping us preview the anniversary show. And of course, I want to thank the producer, Andrew Rich, who, if it wasn't for him, these weeks where Rich isn't around, let me tell you guys something. You might get a show, but it'd be a bare bones ass show with some horrible production if it wasn't for Andrew Rich. So you should all send him a thank you. He does tremendous work with me and helps me get these things not only produced in a professional manner so they sound halfway decent, but getting them out in a timely manner as well. And that's it. We will see you guys next week. Take care.
Hey everybody, my name is Jesse Collins, and I want to tell you all about my show, The Gentleman's Wrestling Podcast, here on the Voices of Wrestling Podcast Network. On the Gentleman's Wrestling Podcast, we do a thorough analysis on the biggest issues and trends within the pro wrestling industry. We talk a lot about pro wrestling media, we talk a lot about fan culture and wrestling's place within general pop culture, and we talk about the broader influences that are shaping the way we discuss and analyze the pro wrestling industry. We've had some of the brightest minds in the pro wrestling intelligentsia on the show, including WrestleNomics host Brandon Thurston, both Rich Craich and Joe Lanza from the Flagship Wrestling Podcast, Trevor Dame from the Through the Years podcast, and a whole lot more. This isn't a show for hot takes. It's not a show recapping the latest episode of television. This is a show focusing on the biggest topics in pro wrestling and doing a deep dive on the real stories behind the surface level analysis you might find elsewhere. The Gentleman's Wrestling Podcast is available wherever you get your podcasts, and we'd really appreciate it if you gave us a try. Thanks.